Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Chainsaw Man and built a harem with Makima, Power, and Himeno? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox in the Concrete Jungle. The rain fell on Tokyo not like a cleansing, but like a stain. It came down in thick, oily sheets, pooling in the cracks of broken pavement and running in grimy rivulets down the sides of buildings choked with rust and neglect. Neon signs, a lurid symphony of pink and electric blue, bled into the puddles, their vibrant promises of pleasure and commerce turning into a sick, wavering slurry on the asphalt. The air was thick with the smells of wet garbage, cheap noodles, and the low, metallic tang of fear. It was a city gasping for breath, and in its darkest alleys, it often choked. In one such alley, a chasm between a derelict pachinko parlor and a love hotel with a flickering vacancy sign, the choking was literal. Kneel before my magnificent self, you foul creature. Power shrieked, her voice a saw-toothed tear in the fabric of the night. She stood atop a mountain of overflowing dumpsters, a queen on a throne of refuse. Her long, pinkish hair was plastered to her face, and her sharp, cross-patterned eyes blazed with a mixture of fury and genuine glee. In her hands, she held a warhammer of impossible size, forged from the blood that seeped from a dozen shallow cuts on her arms. It was a beautiful, terrifying thing, crimson and semi-translucent, pulsing with a faint, internal light. Her subject was less than impressed. It was a devil born from the fear of being forgotten. A grotesque parody of gluttony. Its body was a pale, bloated sack of flesh, the size of a small car, that seemed to absorb the ambient light. It had no legs, but dozens of thin, twitching limbs like centipede legs propelled its quivering bulk forward. Its most disturbing feature was the collection of mouths that pocked its surface, some small and puckered, hers gaping maws lined with teeth like shattered glass. With every lurch forward, they would open and close, emitting a wet, slurping sound that scraped at the nerves. A handful of public safety devil hunters in black suits were scattered around the alley's entrance, their faces pale under the strobing neon. Two were already on the ground, not bleeding, but staring up at the rain with vacant eyes. A thin line of drool tracing a path from the corner of their mouths to their ears. One of the remaining hunters, a kid barely out of his teens, fumbled with his sidearm, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the steel. It ate Sergeant Tanaka's memory of his own daughter, the kid stammered, his voice cracking. He just went blank. Power paid him no mind. All that mattered was the glorious battle. You have witnessed my awesome power. Now, feel its wrath. With a guttural roar, she leapt from the dumpsters, bringing the blood hammer down in a devastating arc. It was a blow that could pulverize concrete. A strike meant to end the fight in a spectacular spray of devil gore. It connected with the amnesia devil's hide with a dull, wet thump. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the crimson hammer began to dissolve. Not shatter, but melt, its form turning into a thick, red liquid that was drawn into the devil's pale skin through a dozen unseen pores. The devil quivered, swelling slightly, and one of its larger mouths twisted into something that hideously mimicked a smile. Power landed on the wet ground, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her hammer was gone. What? You ate my glorious attack. A low gurgle emanated from the creature. Then, from its largest maw, a perfect replica of her blood hammer erupted, swung on an invisible psychic tether, and slammed into her side. The blow was immense. Power flew through the air like a discarded toy, crashing into the brick wall of the pachinko parlor with a sickening crunch. She slumped to the ground, her jaunty horns scraping against the brick. A gasp of genuine pain escaping her lips. My blood, she wheezed, trying to push herself up. The devil had not only absorbed her attack, it had absorbed the very essence of the blood she'd used to make it. She felt weaker, drained. The cuts on her arms weren't closing as quickly. The amnesia devil slithered toward her, its many mouths working hungrily. The remaining devil hunters raised their weapons. A pathetic gesture of defiance. The creature ignored them. It had tasted something special, something potent. It wanted more. Power looked up, her usual arrogance replaced by a flicker of primal fear. The thing was almost on her. It was going to do more than just kill her. It was going to unmake her, eat every precious memory of her magnificent self until nothing was left but a drooling husk. The thought was more terrifying than any death. And then, a figure stepped out of the rain. He seemed to simply materialize at the mouth of the alley, a point of absolute stillness in the swirling chaos. The downpour, which soaked everything and everyone else in seconds, seemed hesitant to touch him, the drops parting an inch from his body as if repelled by an invisible heat. He wore a simple black jacket over a dark shirt and pants, practical clothes that somehow looked utterly out of place. He wasn't armed. He wasn't in a uniform. His hair was the color of sunshine, a shocking splash of impossible brightness in the grimy dark, and his eyes, when they scanned the scene, were a blue so deep and clear they seemed to hold a piece of a sky that this city had long forgotten. His gaze swept over the scene with an unnerving calm. He took in the fallen officers, the terrified rookie, the cowering fiend, and the grotesque devil. His expression wasn't one of fear or aggression, but of weary, profound analysis. It was the look of a man who had seen 1,000 battlefields and was tired of seeing one more. "Hey, get out of here, civilian!" the rookie hunter yelled, his voice thin with panic. "It's a devil." The blond man didn't seem to hear him. His eyes locked onto Power, huddled against the wall, and a flicker of something, empathy, maybe, or just pure, unadulterated protective instinct, crossed his features. He took a step forward. The amnesia devil, sensing a new meal, a fresh and vibrant consciousness, diverted its attention from Power. Several of its mouths swiveled toward the newcomer, letting out a chorus of wet, eager clicks. The man ignored it. He walked calmly toward Power, his boots making soft, measured sounds on the wet asphalt. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the noise of the rain and the city with absolute clarity. Power stared at him, baffled. "Of course I'm hurt, you idiot human. This thing is." "Stay back," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He placed himself between her and the advancing devil, a simple act of shielding that felt as solid and immovable as a mountain. The amnesia devil, enraged by being ignored, lunged. It was surprisingly fast, its bulk sliding over the wet ground like a slug on oil. The man didn't flinch. He simply raised his right hand. He didn't make a sign. He didn't chant an incantation. He just held his palm open, and in its center, reality began to warp. A pinpoint of brilliant, golden light appeared, spinning with furious speed. The air itself seemed to scream, a high-pitched, harmonic shriek that drowned out every other sound. The light expanded, coalescing into a perfect, churning sphere of raw, compressed energy, a miniature sun held in the palm of his hand. A tiny hurricane of impossible power. The golden light threw his shadow, long and stark, against the far wall, and in that instant, he looked less like a man and more like a myth. Naruto Uzumaki felt the familiar, comforting thrum of chakra. It was different here. In his old world, it was a river flowing from a vast ocean. Here, it was a deep, hidden wellspring inside him, a person. Al reservoir of power that was utterly alien to this dimension. But it was his, and it answered his call. The amnesia devil, driven by pure instinct, opened its largest mouth to devour the beautiful, shining thing. Naruto moved. He didn't charge. He flowed. One moment he was standing before Power, the next he was beside the devil, his body a blur of black and gold. He thrust his hand forward. Rasengan, he breathed, the name a half-forgotten prayer on his lips. The sphere of churning energy met the devil's hide. There was no explosion, no grand detonation. There was only a sound, a grinding, pulverizing roar that seemed to come from the very bedrock of the city. The sphere didn't just strike the devil, it bored into it, a vortex of annihilation that ripped and tore and scoured. The pale flesh was shredded into vapor. The mouths screamed, but the sound was instantly devoured by the Rasengan's shriek. The devil's form imploded, collapsing in on the point of impact, ground down into nothingness molecule by molecule. For 3 seconds, the alley was filled with the blinding golden light and the soul-shaking roar. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light vanished. The sound cut out. Silence. Naruto stood in the center of the alley, his hand still outstretched, wisps of golden steam curling from his palm. Where the amnesia devil had been, there was nothing. Not a drop of blood, not a scrap of flesh. Even the grimy pavement beneath it had been scoured clean, leaving a perfect, shallow crater in the asphalt, steam rising from its edges. The sheer, utter finality of the act was more shocking than any gore could have been. The rain continued to fall, hissing as it hit the superheated spot on the ground. The rookie devil hunter had dropped his gun. His mouth was hanging open, his mind utterly incapable of processing what he had just witnessed. Power pushed herself away from the wall, her ruby eyes wider than they had ever been. She had seen strong devils. She had seen powerful hunters. She had never, in her entire existence, seen anything like that. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a fiend's ability. It was something else. Something primal and absolute. Naruto lowered his hand, flexing his fingers. He looked at the clean patch of ground, a flicker of sadness in his blue eyes. Another life taken, even a monster's. It was a chore he never grew to enjoy. He turned and walked back to power. He stalked in front of her, his shadow falling over her small, slumped form. She flinched, expecting a blow, a boast, a demand for fealty. It was the way of the strong. Instead, he crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. The intensity of his gaze was startling up close. He wasn't looking at her like a devil or a fiend. He was looking at her. Then, he extended a hand. "Can you stand?" Power stared at the offered hand as if it were a venomous snake. It was a clean hand, calloused but not scarred, radiating a faint warmth that pushed back the damp chill of the alley. No one had ever offered her a hand. Not like that. Denji might, but he was a dog. This was different. This was a gesture from a being of incomprehensible power, an offer of aid without any apparent demand. It broke every rule she understood about the world. I am the magnificent power. She stammered, the words hollow and automatic. I do not require the assistance of a lowly human. A small, tired smile touched Naruto's lips. It transformed his face, chasing away the battlefield weariness for a moment. Okay, but it's easier if you take the help. Her pride warred with a strange, new feeling. He wasn't demanding she kneel. He wasn't mocking her defeat. He was just helping. Hesitantly, suspiciously, she reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, and impossibly warm. He pulled her to her feet with an effortless strength, his touch gentle. Just as she found her footing, a new presence descended upon the alley. It was a sudden, oppressive weight in the air, a shift in pressure that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The remaining devil hunters, who had been frozen in shock, snapped to attention. Their bodies rigid with a fear that was deeper and more instinctual than what the amnesia devil had inspired. A woman stood at the alley's entrance, flanked by two men in identical black suits. She wore a simple white button-up shirt and black slacks, the uniform of a public safety official, yet she wore it with an elegance that made it look like haute couture. Her hair was a light, reddish blonde, braided and looped in a distinct style. But it was her eyes that held the world captive. They were a strange, otherworldly gold, ringed with red circles, and they seemed to see everything, all at once. A serene, placid smile was fixed on her face, a mask of pleasantness that did nothing to hide the abyss of power behind it. Makima had arrived. Her senses, a unique and terrifying aspect of her contract, reached out to catalog the scene. She felt the fading terror of the rookie hunter, the fiendish blood scent of power, the lingering psychic residue of the obliterated devil. Her mind was a perfect filing system of names, fears, and contracts. It was how she controlled her world. Then, she focused on the blonde man. And hit a wall. It was not a void. A void was an absence, something she could define by its edges. This was not an absence. This was a presence so dense, so absolute, that her senses could find no purchase. It was like trying to perceive the shape of the ocean by touching a single drop. She could feel the scale of it, the immense, ancient, blazing power coiled within him, a power that felt like a sun to the flickering candles of the devils she knew, but she could not read it, could not name it, could not categorize it. It was an anomaly, a beautiful, terrifying, infuriating blank spot in her otherwise perfect knowledge. He was the most powerful thing she had ever encountered, and she had no idea what he was. The placid smile on her lips tightened for a fraction of a second, the only outward sign of her shock. Then, it relaxed, but the quality of it had changed. The pleasantness was still there, but underneath it, a new element had been introduced: hunger. A deep, acquisitive hunger for the one thing in the world she did not understand. She walked forward, her heels clicking softly on the clean pavement of the crater Naruto had made. The two men with her remained at the entrance, silent sentinels. "That was quite the display," she said, her voice as smooth and pleasant as her smile. She stopped a respectful 10 feet from Naruto. "You saved my subordinates. I thank you." Naruto let go of Power's hand, turning to face Makima fully. He met her gaze without flinching. He had felt her arrival like a change in the weather. In his world, there were people who radiated presence like this. Cage. They carried the weight of their villages, their power a palpable force. This woman had that same weight, but it was different. Colder, sharper. They were in trouble, Naruto replied simply. "I acted." "You did," Makima agreed. "With a power I've never seen before. You are not a registered devil hunter. You have no visible contracts. You are not a fiend, nor a devil." Her head tilted slightly, a gesture of innocent curiosity that was anything but. "So, what are you?" "My name is Naruto Uzumaki." The answer was direct, yet it told her nothing. Makima's smile didn't falter. "A name. That's a start. And this power, Naruto Uzumaki. Where does it come from?" "From a friend," Naruto said, his expression unreadable. A lie that was the deepest truth. He could feel Kurama stirring within him, a deep, rumbling consciousness awakened by the use of his power. The old fox was as disoriented by this world as he was, but their bond was the one constant, the anchor in this strange new reality. Makima's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He was deflecting, but not out of fear or defiance. He was simply private. It was maddening. "I see," she said, though she clearly didn't. "Regardless, unregistered use of abilities of this magnitude is a serious matter. You'll have to come with me. We have much to discuss." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. The world bent to her will. This man would too. Naruto considered her. He was alone in a world he didn't understand. He had no home, no allies, no knowledge of the rules. This woman, whoever she was clearly a person of immense authority. Going with her was the most logical path to getting the answers he needed. Submission didn't enter the equation. It was a strategic choice. "All right," he said with a nod. The ease of his agreement surprised her more than any resistance would have. She had been prepared for a confrontation, a negotiation, a test of wills. His simple, calm acceptance was disarming. "Excellent," she said, her smile returning to its default state of serene control. She gestured for her men to come forward. As they approached, Naruto heard it. A whisper, so faint it was almost lost in the sound of the rain. It seemed to emanate from the very air where the amnesia devil had been destroyed. A final, fading echo of its existence. Noisy. So much noise. The silence is coming. He frowned, tilting his head. "Did you hear that?" Makima paused. "Hear what?" "I hear the rain." Naruto looked at Power, who was still staring at him with a mixture of fear and fascination. Did you hear a whisper?" Power just shook her head, her pigtails flopping. She was too busy trying to figure out if he was a god or just a very strange, very strong human. To unmake all the noise. The whisper faded into nothing. Naruto's frown deepened. He was the only one. The echo had been for him. A warning, or a promise. "It was nothing," he said, turning his attention back to Makima. His internal radar was screaming. He had just landed in this world, and already, a new threat. One even the local powerhouse couldn't perceive, was making itself known. "If you say so," Makima said, her gaze lingering on him for a moment too long. She filed his reaction away for later analysis. Another piece of the puzzle. She turned and began to walk out of the alley, her posture exuding an unshakable confidence that he would follow. He did. As he walked past the rookie hunter, he placed a gentle hand on the kid's shoulder. "It's over now. Take care of your friends," Naruto said. The simple act of human kindness seemed to snap the boy out of his stupor. He nodded numbly, his eyes filled with a worshipful terror. Naruto fell into step just behind Makima, with Power trailing after him like a confused duckling. She wasn't sure what was happening, but the strongest thing in the vicinity was this blonde man, and the second strongest seemed to be the woman in the white shirt. The safest place to be was near them. Her survival instincts were simple and brutally effective. As they emerged from the alley onto the main street, a black, unmarked sedan pulled silently to the curb, its doors opened by waiting agents. The city lights washed over them, the neon glare harsh and unforgiving. Makima paused at the open car door, looking back at Naruto. The serene smile was back, but her eyes held the glint of a predator that had just discovered a magnificent new prey. "Welcome to the public safety devil hunters, Naruto-kun," she said, the honorific slipping out with a practiced, intimate familiarity. "I have a feeling you're going to make things very interesting." Naruto simply met her gaze. His own expression a calm sea. "I just want to find my place in this world," he said. "And protect the people I care about. Everything else is just details." Shi-Fo owned his sincerity to be the most exotic and captivating thing about him. In her world of transactional contracts and fear-based power, his simple, noble clarity was the ultimate anomaly. And Makima always got what she wanted. He got into the car, the door closing with a soft, final thud. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, its taillights bleeding red into the rain-soaked streets, carrying the Ox away from the alley and into the heart of the concrete jungle. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Devil, the Fiend, and the Contract. The first thing Naruto learned about his new apartment was that its walls were tragically thin. The second thing he learned was that his new neighbor, Power, considered 6 a.m. to be the ideal time for a one-woman metal concert, with her own screaming vocals as the lead instrument. He was jolted from a light, restless sleep by a shriek that could curdle milk, followed by a series of resounding thuds against the shared wall. "Bow before my morning hymn, insects. The sun itself rises only at my command. I demand tribute. I demand bacon." Naruto sat up on the simple futon that public safety had provided. He stared at the vibrating wall, a deep, bone-weary sigh escaping his lips. His apartment was Spartan, clinical almost. A bed, a small table, a kitchenette with a hot plate, and a window that looked out onto a breathtakingly dense cityscape of concrete and steel. It was the polar opposite of his old apartment in Konoha, which had been a chaotic, lived-in mess of instant ramen cups and ninja scrolls. This place felt like a waiting room. Another thunderous crash rattled the wall. "Nyako. My dearest, do you hear my song? It is a ballad of dominance and hunger." Naruto rubbed his face, the phantom feeling of Kurama's grumbling presence a familiar comfort in his mind. "This is your life now," he thought, a touch of morbid humor coloring the notion. "From saving the world to being a noise complaint mediator for a blood-crazed, whatever she is." He swung his legs off the futon. He was dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and black pants, his standard sleeping attire. The sun, a pale, watery disk in the smoggy sky, was just beginning to cast long shadows between the monolithic buildings. Deciding that sleep was a lost cause, he headed for the door. He didn't bother knocking on Power's door. He just turned the knob. It was unlocked. The scene within was an assault on the senses. The apartment was identical to his in layout, but where his was empty, hers was a testament to pure, unadulterated chaos. Piles of clothes, some clean, some filthy, all gaudy, were strewn everywhere. Empty bags of chips and half-eaten candy bars formed small mountains on the floor. The television was on, blaring some mind-numbing morning show at full volume, but no one was watching it. A fat, ginger cat, Nyako, presumably, was perched regally atop the television, observing the pandemonium with a look of serene indifference. And in the center of it all was Power. She was in the middle of what looked like a brutal, one-sided wrestling match with her mattress, which she had dragged into the middle of the room. She was trying to suplex it, her face contorted in a mask of supreme effort. Her horns catching the morning light. "Victory will be mine," she bellowed, attempting to hoist the unwieldy object over her head. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Fighting your bed again." Power froze. The mattress held precariously over her head. She slowly turned, her red, cross-patterned eyes fixing on him. A slow grin spread across her face, all sharp teeth. "Human, you have come to witness my morning training. I am preparing my body for glorious battle by vanquishing this lumpy fiend." She punctuated the statement by heaving the mattress, which flew across. the room and crushed a small tower of stolen magazines. Right, Naruto said, his tone dry. Looks more like you're losing. He walked into the apartment, expertly navigating the minefield of trash on the floor. Nayako watched him, then let out a soft "Muro" of greeting. Naruto reached up and scratched the cat behind the ears, a gesture that earned him a loud, rumbling purr. Power's grin faltered. Hey, do not touch the magnificent Nayako without my express permission. He is a royal familiar, not a common stray for any fool to pet. He seems to like it, Naruto observed, giving the cat another scratch. And you were screaming about bacon. You can't make bacon by yelling at the wall. A ruse, she declared, puffing out her chest. A tactical maneuver to lure my enemies into a false sense of security. Naruto walked past her to the kitchenette. It was a disaster zone. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, caked with old food. He opened the fridge. It contained 3 cans of beer, a browning head of lettuce, and an entire shelf dedicated to containers of what looked like medical-grade blood packs. He sighed again, closing the door. He turned back to her. Have you ever actually cooked anything? Power scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. Cooking is for lesser beings. I am fueled by victory and the blood of my foes. And sometimes, things that other people cook for me. Naruto surveyed the squalor, the sheer, unapologetic entropy of the room. He could see 2 paths forward. He could leave her to her filth and her mattress wrestling. Or, he could do what he always did. He could try to fix it. It was a compulsion, an ingrained part of his very being. To see a problem and not at least try to do something about it felt like a betrayal of himself. All right, here's the deal, he said, his voice taking on a new tone of quiet authority. You help me clean this mess up, and I'll make you the best breakfast you've ever had. Power's eyes narrowed suspiciously. A deal? What trickery is this, human? Are you attempting to enslave me with promises of delicious food? No, it's called being a decent neighbor, Naruto said. He picked up an empty pizza box and folded it flat. And if you're going to be my partner on missions, you need to be properly fueled. You were weak yesterday. Your blood hammer just dissolved. The casual observation hit a nerve. Power's bravado deflated, replaced by a sullen pout. The devil was a cheater, she muttered, kicking at a pile of laundry. It ate my power. Stronger enemies will do worse, Naruto said, his voice softening slightly. You need to be at your best. That starts here. He held out a trash bag he'd retrieved from under the sink. Come on, it'll be faster with 2 of us. She stared at the bag, then at him, then at Nayako, who seemed to be giving her a look of feline encouragement. She grumbled, a low, guttural sound of protest. Fine, but the breakfast had better be worthy of my station. If it is not, I will drain you of all your blood and feed you to Nayako. Nayako would not eat me, Naruto said with absolute certainty, winking at the cat. We're friends. An hour later, the apartment was, if not clean, at least habitable. The trash was bagged, the dishes were washed, a task Naruto had to supervise closely to ensure Power used soap, and the mattress was back on its frame. And the air was filled with a scent that was almost alien to this part of the city. Sizzling bacon, frying eggs, and the rich, savory aroma of miso soup. Naruto worked at the small hot plate with unpracticed efficiency, his hands a blur as he plated 2 generous portions. He'd borrowed the ingredients from his own fridge, which he had stocked yesterday with a methodical trip to a local market. He placed a plate in front of Power at the small, newly cleared table. It was a simple breakfast. Bacon, 2 fried eggs, a scoop of rice, and a bowl of steaming soup. For Power, who was used to eating stolen convenience store food or just drinking blood, it looked like a royal feast. She stared at it, her sharp eyes wide. She poked an egg with her fork, then sniffed the bacon suspiciously. Finally, she took a bite. Her entire body went still. Her eyes glazed over. A low, keening sound of pure ecstasy escaped her lips. This, she whispered, her mouth full. This is 1,000 times more glorious than the finest blood. This is a meal of the gods. She then proceeded to inhale the entire plate in less than 30 seconds, a whirlwind of motion and appreciative grunts. Naruto watched her, a small smile playing on his lips as he ate his own meal at a more human pace. When she was done, She slammed her fork down and pointed it at him. Human. Naruto. You will make this for me every day. It was a demand, but it lacked its usual imperious edge. It was closer to a desperate plea. I'll think about it, he said, finishing his soup. Maybe if you learn to flush the toilet. Power opened her mouth to protest, then seemed remember the taste of the bacon and thought better of it. She just grunted and crossed her arms, a look of conflicted avarice on her face. A bond was forming, not through grand speeches or shared trauma, but over a plate of eggs and the establishment of basic household chores. It was bizarre, and yet, for Naruto, it felt strangely natural. Their strange domesticity was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Not Power's door, but Naruto's, across the hall. Right, Naruto said, standing up. Time for work. He looked at Power. Makima said to be ready at 8. You're coming. Power groaned. But I have just feasted. It is time for a victory nap. You can nap in the car, Naruto said, already heading for the door. Let's go. Don't be late. He left her pouting in her newly cleaned apartment. The memory of a good meal a more effective motivator than any threat or command could ever be. The offices of the Public Safety Devil Hunters Special Division 4 were a study in organized chaos and institutional beige. Desks were cluttered with paperwork, empty coffee cups, and the occasional esoteric-looking charm. The air hummed with the quiet tension of a place where a phone call could mean a messy, world-ending death in the next 30 minutes. Naruto stood in the center of the main office, drawing more than a few curious stares from the other hunters. He had met Makima at the entrance, who had guided him here with her ever-present, serene smile. Power trailed behind him, looking bored and occasionally sticking her tongue out at people who stared too long. This will be your new team, Makima announced, her voice carrying easily over the low hum of the office. She gestured to a corner desk where 2 people were waiting. One was a young man with his dark hair tied up in a traditional topknot. He wore the standard black suit and tie with the precision of a career soldier. His face was sharp, serious, and etched with a permanent frown of disapproval. His hand rested near the hilt of the katana at his waist. A reflexive, constant motion. This was Aki Hayakawa. His eyes, when they met Naruto's, were cold and analytical. The other was a woman lounging in her desk chair, one leg slung casually over the armrest. She had short, dark hair, and a black eye patch covered her right eye. She held a lit cigarette between 2 fingers, a thin plume of smoke curling towards the ceiling. Her expression was one of deep, profound weariness, but her visible eye, a warm brown, held a spark of knowing, cynical amusement. This was Himeno. Aki, Himeno, Makima said, her smile unwavering. This is Naruto Uzumaki. He'll be joining your squad, effective immediately. Power will also be under your supervision in the field. Aki stood up, his posture ramrod straight. Makima-san, he began, his voice tight and formal. With all due respect, we know nothing about this man. His file is non-existent. We don't know his abilities, his contracts, or his allegiances. Standard procedure. Standard procedure is what I say it is. Aki, Makima interrupted, her tone still pleasant but with an underlying edge of steel that silenced him instantly. Naruto is a special case. His ability is his own. Consider him an asset, not a liability. Aki's jaw tightened, but he gave a short, stiff nod. He didn't like it. An unknown variable was a danger to everyone on the team. He looked Naruto up and down, his gaze lingering on Naruto's empty hands. No visible weapons, no signs of a contract. Just a calm-looking blonde kid in a black jacket. It didn't add up. So you're the one who vaporized the memory eater, Himeno said, taking a long drag from her cigarette. She didn't get up. Her voice was smoky, lazy, but her one good eye was sharp, appraising him with a frank curiosity. Heard you made quite a mess. Or rather, the opposite of a mess. I cleaned up after myself, Naruto replied, his tone even. Himeno let out a short, throaty laugh. I'll bet you did. She gestured with her cigarette towards a vacant chair. Well, don't just stand there, golden boy. Welcome to the meat grinder. Try not to die on your first day. It makes for awkward paperwork. I don't plan on it, Naruto said, pulling the chair over and sitting down. Moving with an easy confidence that seemed to irk Aki. And I don't plan on anyone else dying either. That statement hung in the air for a moment. It was so earnest, so naive, that it was almost laughable in this line of work. Aki scoffed under his breath. Himeno, however, looked at him a little differently. The cynical amusement in her eye faded, replaced by something else. A flicker of something cute, she said, but the word lacked its earlier bite. All my partners say that at the beginning. She took another drag of her cigarette, her gaze turning distant. None of them have been right so far. The morbid statement was delivered with such casual finality that it cast a chill over their corner of the room. Naruto looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw past the lazy posture and the jaded attitude. He saw a deep, gnawing fear, the terror of inevitable loss that she wore like a second skin. It was a look he knew all too well. He'd worn it himself. Then maybe it's time for a change, he said quietly. Before the heavy moment could linger, Makima clapped her hands together, a sharp, cheerful sound that drew all attention back to her. Now that you're all acquainted, we have a new assignment. My office, in 5 minutes. She gave Naruto one last, lingering look, a look that was equal parts owner, scientist, and admirer. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do in a team setting, Naruto-kun. Then she turned and walked away, her presence receding like a tide, leaving the three of them, and a thoroughly bored Power, in a tense, uncertain silence. Aki was the first to speak, his voice low and sharp. I don't know what you are, or what kind of deal you have with Makima. But on my team, you follow my lead. You follow procedure. You do anything unpredictable. You put us all at risk. Understand? Naruto met his intense gaze. I understand you're the squad leader. But if I see a better way to get the job done and keep everyone in one piece, I'm going to take it. Quote, that's not how this works. Sounds good to me, Himeno cut in, stubbing out her cigarette in an overflowing ashtray. She offered Naruto a wry, one-eyed smile. Aki gets a little wound up. Don't mind him. He's just afraid his precious contracts will get jealous if a new powerhouse is in town. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. He's got a contract with the Fox Devil. Thinks it makes him special. Naruto's blood ran cold. The Fox Devil. He kept his expression perfectly neutral, but inside, his mind was reeling. Kurama stirred within him, a surge of indignant, ancient rage. There is no other Fox Devil. Imposter. Charlatan. Let me out, Naruto, I will show this whelp the meaning of a true Biju. Calm down, Kurama, Naruto projected back silently. It's a different world, remember. Different rules. Let's just see what this is about. The Fox Devil, Naruto asked, his voice steady. What does it do? Aki looked at him, a flicker of pride warring with his suspicion. Khan, he said simply, holding up his hand in a specific sign, like a fox's head. The air shimmered, and for a brief second, the massive, spectral head of a white fox with multiple eyes materialized. Its jaws open. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. It devours. A useful, reliable contract. Naruto nodded slowly. It was powerful, yes, but it was a shadow, an echo. It was nothing compared to the roaring, blazing sun of a being sealed inside him. This world's Fox Devil was just that. A devil born from the fear of foxes. A powerful concept, but a shallow one. It was not Kurama. The realization was both a relief and a source of profound loneliness. Looks useful, was all Naruto said. Himeno grinned. See, Aki, he's impressed. Now play nice. We've got a briefing. She stood up, stretching like a cat. She walked over to Naruto and leaned in close, her one eye twinkling with mischief. She smelled of tobacco and something faintly sweet, like cheap liquor. So, she whispered, her voice a low purr. You single? Naruto blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. I'm kidding, she said, pulling back with a laugh. Mostly. Come on, golden boy, let's go see what fresh hell Makima has cooked up for us. She sauntered off towards Makima's office, her hips swaying with a practiced nonchalance. Aki gave Naruto one last glare of warning before following. Power, who had been trying to teach Nayako, who had somehow followed them to the office how to hunt down a stapler, finally noticed everyone was leaving. Hey, do not leave my magnificent self behind, she yelled, scooping up the cat and running to catch up. Naruto stood for a moment, letting out a slow breath. A hostile team leader, a self-destructive partner, a chaotic fiend, and a manipulative boss. It felt familiar. It felt a little like home. With a small, determined smile, he followed them. Makima's office was on the top floor, a spacious room with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city below. The decor was minimalist and immaculate, dominated by a large, dark wood desk. It was a room that radiated quiet, absolute power. When they entered, Makima was standing by the window, looking down at the sprawling metropolis. "The gun devil," she said without turning around. 13 years ago, it appeared and, in the span of 5 minutes, killed over 1.2 million people across the globe. It was the single greatest act of terror in modern history. She turned to face them, her expression uncharacteristically somber. It was eventually defeated, its body shattered. Pieces of its flesh, each containing a fraction of its immense power, are scattered across the world. They are drawn to one another, seeking to reform. Every government, every major criminal organization, wants them. A large enough piece can turn a minor nation into a global superpower overnight. She walked to her desk and picked up a file. 2 hours ago, our intel. Eigen's network confirmed that a German special operations unit has illegally entered Japan. Their target is a fragment of the gun devil's flesh, currently secured in a private vault at the Tokyo Bay shipyard, awaiting transport. She slid the file onto the desk. Aki picked it up, his eyes scanning the first page. "The Germans have their own devil contractors," Makima continued. "They are well-funded, highly trained, and utterly ruthless. This is not a standard devil hunt. This is a black ops mission. The official objective is to secure the gun devil fragment and repel the foreign agents." She paused, her gaze settling on Naruto. Her serene smile returned, but it had a sharp, predatory edge. "Your orders are to eliminate the hostile force. They are foreign military operating illegally on our soil. You have full authorization to use lethal force. Leave no survivors. We cannot afford an international incident or leave any loose ends." The order was cold, clinical, and absolute. It was also a test. She was giving Naruto, the man who refused to kill a defeated human enemy in the alley, a direct order to slaughter an entire squad. She wanted to see what he would do. Would he obey? Would he refuse? Or would he, as she suspected, do something else entirely? Aki nodded, his expression grim. Understood. For him, it was simple. An order was an order. An enemy was an enemy. Himeno's expression didn't change, but she took out another cigarette, her fingers moving with a slow, deliberate motion. Kill or be killed. It was the only rule she knew. Naruto remained silent, his blue eyes fixed on Makima. He saw the test for what it was. He saw the subtle manipulation, the intellectual curiosity disguised as a military command. He was a pawn in her game, a fascinating new piece she was moving around the board to see how it worked. "My objective," Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, "is to secure the fragment and protect my team. I'll handle the loose ends in my own way." Makima's smile widened slightly. It was the perfect answer. Not defiance, not submission, but a declaration of his own terms. It was exactly what she had hoped for. "Very well," she said. "The Germans are expected to make their move within the hour. Get going." As they filed out of the office, Makima stopped Naruto with a soft, "Naruto-kun." He turned. She walked up to him, stopping just a foot away. She looked up at him, her strange, ringed eyes searching his. "This world is not a kind place," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate, almost conspiratorial whisper. "It survives on a balance of fear. Power is the only thing that provides real security. I can give you that security. I can give you a place, a purpose. All I ask in return is your loyalty. Your strength, bound to me." It was the same silken offer from the night before. Rephrased. A leash disguised as a partnership. Naruto looked down at her, at this beautiful, terrifying woman who saw the world as a collection of things to be owned. And he gave her a small, sad smile. "You don't have to buy loyalty, Makima," he said softly. "You just have to be worthy of it." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving her standing alone in the center of her web. A flicker of genuine surprise and something akin to frustration in her golden eyes. This man, This man was going to be more difficult, and more delightful, than she could have ever imagined. The shipyard was a skeleton of rust and steel, a forgotten industrial graveyard on the edge of the bay. Rain fell in a steady, determined drizzle, slicking the metal walkways and turning the ground to mud. The air smelled of salt, rust, and diesel. Cranes stood like skeletal sentinels against the bruised purple sky. Naruto, Aki, Himeno, and Power were crouched behind a stack of shipping containers. The dull clang of rain on metal, a constant, rhythmic drumming. The vault is in the central warehouse, Building C, Aki said, pointing to a large, windowless structure 100 yards away. Our intel says the German team is a 4-man unit. They'll likely try a stealth insertion. We need to spot them before they get to the objective. Hard to spot anyone in this mess, Himeno muttered, pulling her suit jacket tighter around herself. It's a maze. Not for me, Naruto said. He crouched lower, bringing his hands together in a familiar sign. The cross seal. What are you doing? Aki asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Getting a better look, Naruto whispered, shadow clone jutsu. In 2 silent puffs of smoke, 2 perfect duplicates of Naruto appeared beside him. Aki and Himeno stared, speechless. Even Power looked impressed. What devil is that? Aki stammered, his by-the-book mind struggling to categorize the ability. It wasn't a transformation. It wasn't a conjuration. They were solid. They were real. No devil, Naruto said. Just me. He looked at his clones. You know the plan. 1 to the east perimeter, 1 to the west. High ground. Stay out of sight. Report back as soon as you see anything. The clones nodded in unison, and then, with a speed that was almost too fast for the eye to follow, they vanished into the labyrinth of containers and scaffolding, moving with a silent, ghostly grace. Aki stared at the empty space where the clones had been, his mouth slightly agape. How? He's a sneaky one, isn't he? Himeno said, a genuine grin on her face. She nudged Aki with her elbow. See, told you he was more interesting than your stupid fox. Aki just shook his head, trying to recalibrate his entire understanding of how powers were supposed to work. This man was a tactical nightmare and a logistical miracle all at once. They waited in silence for several minutes, the only sound the drumming of the rain. Naruto was perfectly still, his eyes closed, his consciousness linked to his 2 clones. He saw the shipyard from 2 different vantage points simultaneously, a panoramic, 3-dimensional map forming in his mind. Got him, the thought came from his eastern clone. 4 targets, moving fast and low along the northern access road. Military gear, armed. They're heading for the maintenance tunnels under Warehouse C. Smart approach. Avoids the main entrances. Naruto's eyes snapped open. They're here. 4 of them. North side. They're using the tunnels to get under the warehouse. Aki and Himeno looked at him, surprised by the speed and precision of the information. How do we play this? Aki asked, instinctively deferring to the man with the better intel. Naruto's mind was already working, processing the layout, the enemy's path, and his team's abilities. We cut them off. Aki, you and I will intercept them in the main tunnel junction. It's a choke point. Himeno, you and Power stay up here. The tunnel's Avenue ventilation shafts that open up into the warehouse floor. If any of them get past us, they'll pop up right at your feet. Be ready. You want me to babysit the fiend? Himeno asked, sounding less than thrilled. I want you to be our last line of defense, Naruto corrected, his tone serious. They can't reach that fragment. And Power, he said, looking at the fiend, you listen to Himeno. No grandstanding. No charging in. You fight when she tells you to fight. Got it? Power, who had been idly forming a small blood knife and using it to clean her nails, looked up. She met Naruto's intense gaze and, for once, didn't offer a theatrical protest. She just nodded. Fine, but I get to keep the good parts of anyone we kill. We're not killing them if we can avoid it, Naruto stated flatly. What? Aki interjected, his eyes wide with disbelief. Makima's orders were to eliminate. Makima's orders were to handle the loose ends, Naruto countered, his voice sharp. Dead men tell no tales. But captured, disarmed men can be very informative. Now, are we going, or are you going to stand here arguing policy while the objective is being stolen? Aki gritted his teeth, clearly torn between high orders and Naruto's undeniable tactical advantage. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he nodded. Fine, your way, but if this goes bad, it's on you. Everything is always on me, Naruto said, his voice quiet. Let's move. He and Aki slipped away into the shadows, heading for the tunnel entrance. Himeno watched them go, then looked at Power, who was staring after Naruto with a thoughtful expression. He's bossy, Power declared. Yeah, Himeno agreed, lighting another cigarette. He is. She took a long drag, a small, strange smile playing on her lips. I think I'm starting to like him. The maintenance tunnel was dark, damp, and smelled of mold and stagnant water. A single line of flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows down the concrete corridor. Water dripped from rusted pipes overhead, each drop echoing in the oppressive silence. Naruto and Aki moved like wraiths, their footsteps silent on the grimy floor. They reached a junction where two tunnels met, a small, square room with a thick steel door leading further into the complex. This was the choke point. They'll come from there, Naruto whispered, pointing down the left-hand tunnel. He pressed himself against the wall, flattening into the shadows. Aki did the same on the opposite side, his hand resting on his katana. The cold, metallic scent of his fox devil contract was a faint, sharp tang in the air. They didn't have to wait long. They heard the splash of boots in shallow water, then the low, guttural murmur of German. 4 figures emerged from the darkness, moving in a tight, professional diamond formation. They were clad in black tactical gear, night vision goggles flipped up on their helmets, rifles held at the ready. They were professionals. The moment the last man cleared the corner, Aki moved. Khan, he hissed. The spectral head of the fox devil erupted from the wall beside him, a silent, ghostly predator. It lunged, its jaws impossibly wide, and swallowed the rearmost German soldier whole. There was no scream, just a faint, wet crunch, and the man was gone. The only thing left was his rifle, clattering to the floor. The other 3 soldiers reacted instantly, spinning around, rifles raised, shouting in alarm. But Naruto was already on them. He burst from the shadows, a blur of motion. He didn't aim for a kill. His movements were a storm of precise, economical strikes. He met the side of his hand into the wrist of the nearest soldier, sending his rifle flying. A follow-up palm heel strike to the man's chest knocked the wind out of him, and he collapsed, gasping. The Khan soldier tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Naruto was too close. He grabbed the barrel, twisting it aside as it fired, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding, the roar deafening in the enclosed space. Using the man's own momentum, Naruto spun him around, locked his arms behind his back, and slammed him face first into the concrete wall with enough force to knock him unconscious. The leader of the German unit, a hard-faced man with a jagged scar on his cheek, was a cut above the rest. He didn't panic. He dropped his rifle, pulling a long, wicked-looking combat knife, and lunged at Naruto. At the same time, he bit down hard on his own thumb. A surge of dark energy flared around him. A contract, Naruto realized. Triggered by self-harm, the German's skin took on a gray, stony sheen, and his speed increased unnaturally. The knife slashed through the air where Naruto's throat had been a split second before. Naruto flowed backward, dodging the flurry of slashes. The man was fast, strong, his skin now as hard as rock. A direct hit would be useless. Aki, having dealt with his target, moved to assist, drawing his katana in a fluid, lethal motion. Stay back. My blade can cut through his defense. No, Naruto yelled, parrying a knife thrust with his forearm, the impact jarring him. I need him alive. The German leader grinned, seeing the discord. Your friend is smarter. In our line of work, only the dead are truly disarmed. He feinted high with the knife and then kicked out, aiming a stone-hard boot at Naruto's knee. Naruto twisted, letting the kick glance off his thigh. He winced. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. He needed to end this. Naruto dropped low, sweeping the German's feet out from under him. As the man fell, his rock-like skin scraping loudly on the concrete. Naruto didn't press the attack. Instead, he flashed through a series of hand signs, his fingers a blur. Snake, ram, monkey, boar, horse, tiger. Shadow possession jutsu. Naruto's shadow stretched, elongating unnaturally in the flickering light, a ribbon of pure darkness. It shot across the floor and connected with the fallen soldier's own shadow. The man froze, his body locked in place, every muscle refusing to obey. He tried to speak, but his jaw wouldn't move. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion. He was a puppet, and Naruto held the strings. Aki stared, his katana half drawn. His mind once again struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. First clones, now this bizarre shadow magic. It's over, Naruto said, walking over to the paralyzed German leader. He crouched down, his expression serious. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine echoed from the leader's belt. A small, circular device with a blinking red light. A beeping sound started, quiet at first, then rapidly increasing in pitch and frequency. A dead man's switch, Aki shouted. It's a bomb. Naruto's eyes widened. He saw the German's eyes flicker towards the steel door behind them. It wasn't just a bomb. It was a breach charge. A final, desperate gambit. There was no time to disarm it. No time to run. Just as the beeping reached its frantic crescendo, a new voice echoed in the tunnel, lazy and disaffected. Ghost. From the ceiling above, a spectral, multi-jointed, ghostly white arm phased through the concrete. It was translucent, ethereal, and utterly terrifying. It swooped down, its long, pale fingers wrapping around the German leader. The bomb detonated. The explosion was immense, a blinding flash of white and a deafening roar that shook the entire tunnel. But the force, the shrapnel, the fire, it was all contained. The ghostly hand simply absorbed the blast, its form flickering for a second before becoming solid again. It retracted back through the ceiling, taking the now dead German with it. Silence fell once more, broken only by the ringing in Naruto's and Aki's ears. Smoke and the smell of ozone filled the air. Himeno's head poked down through the hole in the ceiling where the ghost arm had emerged. She had her eye patch pushed up, revealing a scarred, empty socket. This was the cost of her contract. See, she said, a smirk playing on her lips. Told you I'd be a good last line of defense. You boys owe me a drink. Naruto looked up at her, then at Aki, who was staring at the scorched spot on the floor with a shocked expression. His plan had been good. But he'd missed the bomb. Himeno had saved them. Yeah, Naruto said, a genuine, grateful smile on his face. We do. He had come here to protect them, but in the end, they had protected him. The thought felt good. It felt right. They secured the other two unconscious soldiers and proceeded into the vault. The gun devil fragment was there, a twisted, gnarled piece of metallic flesh the size of a human fist. It pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy, making the teeth ache. As they were preparing to move out, Naruto walked over to the bound German soldiers. He knelt beside one of them. Why were you here? Naruto asked in quiet, clear Japanese. It wasn't just for the fragment, was it? The man spat at him. Go to hell. Last night, Naruto continued, his voice low. I heard a whisper. Something about unmaking the noise. Today, Makima tells us to leave no survivors. It feels connected. He leaned in closer. Who sent you? Who hired you? The soldier's bravado faltered. Fear flickered in his eyes. You don't understand what you're involved in. You're in an anomaly. A disruption to the plan. What plan? The man just shook his head, clamping his mouth shut. But he'd said enough. The apostates of nothing. The other conscious soldier suddenly rasped, his voice filled with a mixture of terror and reverence. They hired us. They paid us more than our government ever could. Not just for the fragment. They wanted you. They called you the primal anomaly. They said your presence here was an intolerable noise. Apostates of nothing. Primal anomaly. Noise. The words clicked into place, connecting to the whisper from the alley. A cold dread, heavier than any physical threat, settled in Naruto's stomach. He wasn't just a stranger in a strange land. He was a target. He stood up, his expression grim. The mission was over, but a much larger, more terrifying conflict was just beginning. Later that night, the rain had finally stopped. The city was spread out below them, a glittering carpet of a million tiny lights. Naruto and Himeno sat on the edge of a rooftop near their apartment building, their legs dangling over the dizzying drop. The air was cool and clean for once. Himeno had kept her promise and dragged them all out for drinks. Aki had begrudgingly come along, nursed one beer for an hour, and then left. Power had tried to drink an entire bottle of vodka, declared it inferior to blood, and passed out under a table. Naruto had ended up carrying her home. Now, it was just the two of them, sharing the quiet of the night. Himeno lit a cigarette, the flare of the lighter briefly illuminating her face. She looked tired, but the deep, bone-deep weariness from the office was gone, replaced by a softer, more contemplative mood. She offered the pack to Naruto. He shook his head. "Don't smoke." "Good for you," she said, taking a long drag. "It's a disgusting habit. A good way to die a little faster." She blew a smoke ring, watching it drift away into the night. "You were good today. The clones, the shadow thing. I've never seen anything like it." "Just some old tricks," Naruto said, his gaze on the horizon. "And the no killing rule," she added, looking at him with her good eye. "You really meant that, didn't you? Even after that guy almost blew you to pieces." "Killing should always be the last resort," Naruto said. "Especially people. Once you start seeing them as just obstacles, you lose something. A piece of yourself." Himeno was silent for a long moment, the end of her cigarette glowing like a tiny, dying star. "I lost that piece a long time ago," she said softly, her voice devoid of its usual cynicism. "I've had a lot of partners. They've all died, every single one, some torn apart by devils. Some gone in an instant. I made my contract with the ghost devil to protect them. But it's a trade. A piece of my body, a chunk of my lifespan, every time I use its full power. I was ready to give it all up today. In that tunnel, to trade the rest of my life to kill that one guy, just to save Aki." She turned to him, her expression raw and vulnerable in the moonlight. "And then you stopped me. You told me I didn't have to throw my life away. And then you proved it. You had a better way." She looked down at her hands. "Losing comrades. You said it was the worst feeling in the world. You said you wouldn't let it happen again. You sounded like you knew exactly what you were talking about." Naruto's gaze grew distant, his mind flashing with images of Neji, of Jiraiya, of Ado. You sand faces from a war that had defined his life. The pain was a dull, constant ache, a part of his soul. "I do," he whispered, his voice thick with a sorrow that was ages old. Himeno reached out and put her hand on his. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. "I don't know where you came from, golden boy. And I don't really care. But today, for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I'll get to see tomorrow." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a simple, trusting gesture that spoke volumes more than words. The smell of her cigarette mixed with the cool night air. They sat there in silence for a long time. Two deeply scarred people finding a moment of quiet solidarity on a rooftop, high above a city that was always hungry for more. A crack had formed in Himeno's cynical armor. And in that small, fragile space, something new and hopeful was beginning to take root. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Rasengan. The fluorescent lights of the ramen shop cast a warm, greasy glow. A small pocket of defiant normalcy in the perpetual twilight of the city. The air was thick with the steam of boiling broth, the sharp scent of green onions, and the low murmur of conversation. For the members of Special Division 4's most dysfunctional squad, it was the closest thing they'd had to peace all week. Naruto sat at the narrow counter, a massive bowl of miso chashu ramen in front of him. He'd already devoured half of it, eating with a focused, almost religious fervor that was both impressive and a little terrifying. It was a taste of home, a simple comfort that grounded him in a way nothing else in this strange, brutal world could. "Oi, human, your pork looks more glorious than mine," Power declared from beside him, leaning over with a fork aimed at a particularly thick slice of chashu in his bowl. "A true ruler shares the spoils of their feast. It is tribute." Naruto didn't even look up. He simply moved his chopsticks with lightning speed, intercepting her fork with a sharp clack. "Get your own tribute," he said, deftly snatching the pork slice and eating it in one bite. "Or I'll tell Makima who, accidentally, flooded the third-floor bathroom this morning." Power froze, her fork hovering in midair. She slowly retracted it, a theatrical scowl on her face that was betrayed by the fear in her eyes. "You would not dare." That was a strategic hydro assault. To test the building's plumbing integrity. She huffed, turning back to her own, now less appealing, bowl. The threat of Makima was one of the few things that could reliably override her magnificent ego. On the other side of power, a new, younger hunter named Denji was wolfing down his own ramen, somehow managing to get as much on his face as in his mouth. He was a scruffy kid with sharp teeth and an air of perpetual, bewildered hunger. He was a recent addition, a human-devil hybrid like Katana Man, but far less polished. Man, this is the best, he mumbled through a mouthful of noodles. Way better than toast with no jam. Across the table, in a small booth, Aki Hayakawa sat with his usual rigid posture, nursing a glass of water. He watched the scene with a pained expression, as if the sheer lack of decorum was causing him physical discomfort. Could you at least try to eat like civilized human beings? He muttered, though there was no real heat in it. In the week since the shipyard mission, his open hostility towards Naruto had cooled into a grudging, wary respect. He still didn't understand the blonde, but he couldn't deny his effectiveness. Himeno lounged opposite Aki, a small bottle of sake on the table beside her. She took a delicate sip from a tiny cup, her one good eye crinkling in amusement. Oh, let them have their fun, Aki. It's cute. She winked at Naruto. Besides, our golden boy here deserves a good meal. He saved your hide, remember? Aki's frown deepened. He used an unauthorized and unknown technique to paralyze a target. It was reckless. It worked, Himeno countered, taking a puff from her ever-present cigarette. The smoke curled around her face, softening her features. And you're still breathing because of it. And because I blew up the other guy. Teamwork. She'd been different since that night on the rooftop. The lazy, cynical armor was still there, but it was thinner now, more translucent. She smiled more, a real smile that reached her eye. She'd taken to calling Naruto Golden Boy, exclusively, a nickname that was equal parts teasing and affectionate. They had an easy rapport, a shared understanding that seemed to exist just below the surface of their words. Naruto finished his broth with a loud, appreciative slurp, setting the bowl down with a contented sigh. Thanks for the meal, Aki. Aki looked startled. I didn't pay for it. You did, Himeno said with a grin. I put it on your tab. As thanks for being our grumpy, designated warrior. Aki opened his mouth to protest, then just sighed and rubbed his temples. Arguing with her was a losing battle. He looked at Naruto, his expression serious. The intel from those Germans is disturbing. This, apostates of nothing, cult. Makima's analysts are running circles, but they're ghosts. No public records. No known members besides the ones we caught. He lowered his voice. They specifically wanted you. That makes you a high-value target. You need to be more careful. It was the closest Aki could come to saying, I'm worried about you. I'm always careful, Naruto replied, his easygoing smile returning. No, you're not, Himeno, Aki, and Power said in near-perfect unison. Naruto just chuckled. The conversation was light, the atmosphere relaxed. Denji started rambling about a dream he'd had about a giant hamburger. Power began loudly critiquing his dream as being insufficiently glorious. It was a moment of peace. Fragile and fleeting. And then the glass of the ramen shop's front window exploded inwards. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and violence. The RFUL chatter of the shop was replaced by screams of terror and the deafening roar of a gunshot. Patrons dove for cover. The air filled with the smell of cordite and the dust of shattered plaster. Aki reacted instantly, shoving the table over to create a barrier, his hand already on his katana. Get down. Naruto was on his feet, his body coiled like a spring, his blue eyes having lost all their warmth, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of a seasoned warrior. He scanned the chaos, his senses screaming. One shooter, outside, but there was another presence. Someone fast. A young man in a fine suit, with long dark hair and a chillingly calm expression, stepped through the shattered storefront. He held a simple katana, but it was the man himself who radiated menace. It was the same man from the news reports. The grandson of the Yakuza boss Denji had killed. Katana Man. Aki Hayakawa, the man said, his voice smooth and cold. The government dog who hunts his own kind. And, his gaze fell on Denji, who was trembling behind the overturned table. the devil that killed my grandfather. I'm here to collect a debt. But before anyone could react to him, the first attack came from a different direction. An old woman, seemingly a frightened civilian, who had been cowering near the back, suddenly moved with terrifying speed. She lunged not at Katana Man, but at Aki, a long, thin blade appearing in her hand as if from nowhere. Aki, his attention on the man in the suit, was caught off guard. He tried to turn, to bring his sword up, but he was too late. The blade slid between his ribs with a sickening, wet sound. Simultaneously, Katana Man fired a gun he held in his other hand. The bullet tore through Aki's shoulder. Aki gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He stumbled backward, clutching at the twin wounds, and fell to the floor in a heap. Aki! Himeno screamed, her voice raw with panic. It was a coordinated ambush. Perfectly executed. Katana Man then turned his attention to Denji. And now for you. Denji, seeing Aki fall, was paralyzed by fear. He was just a kid, out of his depth. Denji, move, Naruto yelled, pushing him hard. But the world seemed to be moving in slow motion. A second figure appeared beside Katana Man, a young woman with a severe black haircut and a snake tattoo coiling up her arm. Akane Sawatari. She held her hand out, and the head of a massive, spectral snake lunged forward. Its jaws gaping. It wasn't aimed at Denji, but at Naruto, intercepting him as he tried to reach the boy. At the same time, Katana Man blurred forward, his speed inhuman. He drew his blade across Denji's chest in a single, brutal motion. Denji didn't even have time to scream. He was thrown backward, landing in a crumpled heap, his chest a ruin of blood and torn flesh. He didn't move. It had all happened in less than 5 seconds. Aki was down. Denji was dead. The ramen shop was a war zone. Himeno stared at their fallen bodies, her one visible eye wide with horror. Her face, which had been so full of life and mirth moments before, crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. The sake bottle lay shattered at her feet. No, she whispered, a sound of utter devastation. Not again. Not again. All her partners died. It was the curse of her life. The one truth she could never escape. She had allowed herself a flicker of hope, a belief that with Naruto, things might be different. And that hope had just been brutally extinguished. Her grief, deep and black and bottomless, curdled into a white-hot, suicidal rage. She looked at Katana Man, who was wiping Denji's blood from his blade with a silk handkerchief. She looked at Akane Sawatari and her smug, cold expression. And she made her choice. Ghost, Himeno whispered, her voice trembling, ragged. She pushed her eye patch up, revealing the scarred, empty socket beneath. A tear, thick and black, rolled down her cheek from her good eye. I'll give you everything, she sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. My whole body, all of it, just let me use all of your power. Please, kill him. It was the ultimate offer. The final trade, her entire existence in exchange for one last act of vengeance. The air in the ramen shop grew impossibly cold. The spectral form of the ghost devil began to manifest, not as a single arm, but as a maelstrom of them. A vortex of pale, grasping hands erupted from Himeno's back, from the floor. From the very air around her. They were a hurricane of phantom limbs, each one reaching, clawing, yearning. Her body began to flicker, to turn translucent, as the devil greedily accepted her offering. Preparing to consume her utterly. Yes, she hissed, a final, triumphant smile of pure despair on her face. Kill them all. Naruto, having just dodged another lunge from Akane's snake devil, saw what was happening. He saw Himeno fading, willingly giving herself to oblivion. He saw the despair in her eyes, the same despair he'd fought against his entire life, the same despair that had almost claimed him more than once. And a deep, primal roar of defiance erupted from the core of his soul. No, he moved. Ignoring Akane, ignoring Katana Man, he flashed across the room. He didn't use a jutsu. He just ran, propelled by a desperate, burning need. He reached Himeno just as her legs began to dissolve into ghostly mist. He grabbed her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His grip was like steel, an anchor of solid, living flesh in her disintegrating reality. She was cold, her skin like ice. She looked at him, her one good eye unfocused, already seeing the world beyond. "Let me go, Naruto," she whispered. "It's the only way." "No," he roared, his voice cracking with emotion. He pulled her tighter, burying his face in her hair, which smelled of smoke and sake. He could feel her life force being siphoned away, a torrent of energy feeding the spectral storm around them. "You don't have to throw your life away to protect them. You don't have to die for them. You have to live for them. Live for me." His words, raw and desperate and full of a power all their own, pierced through the fog of her grief. They were a direct rebuttal to the lie she had built her entire life upon. "Live for me," the ghost devil, enraged at the interruption of its meal, lashed out. Dozens of spectral hands shot towards Naruto, intending to rip him apart. And then, the furnace inside him ignited. A wave of visible, golden energy erupted from Naruto's body, a concussive blast of pure, incandescent power. It slammed into the ghostly arms, making them recoil as if burned. The pressure in the room skyrocketed, the air becoming thick and heavy, like the bottom of the ocean. Katana Man and Akane stumbled back, their eyes wide with shock. This wasn't the contained, focused power of the Rasengan. This was something else, something wild, ancient, and utterly overwhelming. Naruto's eyes, when he lifted his head, were no longer blue. They were a burning, demonic red. The pupils slitted like a predator's. Black markings, like savage war paint, materialized around his eyes. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that wasn't entirely human. "You," he snarled, his voice a layered chorus of his own and something deeper, older, and infinitely more malevolent. "Will not take her." The golden energy exploded from him, coalescing into a blazing, translucent aura that mirrored his own form. And from the base of his spine, 9 long, whip-like tails of pure, churning golden chakra erupted, lashing through the air with a sound like tearing reality. They were not solid, not fur, but rivers of raw power, each one moving with a predatory intelligence. He had activated his Jinchuriki state, the first true unleashing of Kurama's power in this new world. He was a beacon of impossible, golden light in the ruined, dusty ramen shop. He held Himeno with one arm, his grip the only thing keeping her tethered to the world of the living. With his other hand, he reached out and grabbed one of the ghost devil's arms. The instant his chakra-shrouded fingers made contact, the spectral limb screamed, a high-pitched, psychic shriek of agony. Golden energy, like a spreading infection, surged up the ghostly arm, causing it to smoke and dissolve. Naruto was not just fighting the devil. He was rewriting the contract. He was forcibly severing the connection, pouring his own life force, infinitely vaster and more vibrant than Himeno's, into the link, overwhelming it, poisoning it. "Get out of her," he roared, and the ghost devil, a being born of fear, felt a new and infinitely greater fear. Fear of this sun, this furnace of pure presence that was burning it from the inside out. With a final, agonized shriek, the vortex of spectral hands collapsed, imploding back into the ether. The cold in the room vanished, replaced by the dry, oppressive heat radiating from Naruto. Himeno's body solidified. The last of the ghost devil's influence was purged from her. She slumped against him, her body trembling, exhausted, but whole. She was breathing. She was alive. Naruto gently lowered her to the floor, propping her against the counter. Her eyes were closed, but she was safe. Then, he stood up. He turned slowly, his 9 golden tails weaving a menacing dance behind him. His slitted, crimson eyes fell upon Katana Man and Akane Sawatari. The look in his eyes was not one of anger. It was not one of hatred. It was a look of absolute, terrifying promise. The promise of overwhelming, inescapable violence. "Now," Naruto's voice echoed, low and dangerous. "It's your turn." Katana Man, for all his cold arrogance, felt a tremor of pure, primal fear. He had come here to hunt a dog and a devil. He had found a god. What are you?" he stammered. "Your end," Naruto snarled. He didn't run. He vanished. One moment he was standing over Himeno, the next he was a blur of gold directly in front of Katana Man. The speed was incomprehensible. Katana Man's body screamed at him to transform, to merge with his devil contract. He brought his hands up, a desperate attempt to activate his power. He was too slow. Naruto's fist, wreathed in boiling golden chakra, slammed into Katana Man's stomach. It was not a punch. It was a detonation. The sound was a flat, sickening crack that echoed through the ruined shop. The air itself seemed to shatter around the point of impact. Katana Man's eyes bulged. The air was driven from his lungs in a single, explosive gasp. He was lifted off his feet, his body folding around Naruto's fist, and Wa's sent flying backward like a cannonball. He smashed through the back wall of the ramen shop, through the kitchen, through the exterior wall, and across the alley behind it, finally embedding himself in the concrete wall of the adjacent building with enough force to create a spiderweb of cracks 20 feet wide. He slumped down, unconscious before he even hit the wall, a broken puppet with its strings cut. It was over in an instant. A display of power so total, so absolute, that it defied comprehension. Akane Sawatari stared in horror, her face ashen. Her snake devil hissed, coiling back defensively. She had planned for everything. Every contingency. She had not planned for this. Naruto turned his head, his red eyes pinning her in place. He took a step towards her. Wait, she screamed, holding up her hands. It was a contract. The gun devil. I have a contract with the gun devil. It's making me. She was trying to buy time, to use the name of the ultimate fear as a shield. Suddenly, her own snake devil, the massive spectral head that had been hovering beside her, whipped around. Its eyes were no longer cold and reptilian, but filled with a new, alien terror. It opened its jaws and swallowed her whole. Akane let out one last, gurgling scream before she vanished into the gullet of her own devil. The snake then shimmered and dissolved into nothingness, a contract self-terminating in the most brutal way imaginable. But just before it vanished completely, its head turned to Naruto. Its mouth opened, and a voice that was not its own, a sibilant, dry whisper, echoed in Naruto's mind alone. The great silence welcomes all noise. Your cacophonous soul will be a feast. Then it was gone. Naruto stood in the silence of the ruined shop, the golden aura around him slowly receding. The 9 tails of chakra dissolved into motes of light. His eyes faded from red back to their normal, clear blue, though they now held a deep, profound exhaustion. The power receded, leaving him standing in the dust and debris. Panting softly, the sounds of the city rushed back in. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. He had saved Himeno. He had defeated the enemy. But the cryptic warning chilled him to the bone. This was bigger than a simple Yakuza revenge plot. The apostates of nothing had been pulling the strings all along. He ignored the dead woman. His priorities were clear. He rushed to Aki's side. The swordsman was pale, his breathing shallow, blood pooling beneath him from 2 separate wounds. Don't move, Naruto said, his voice now gentle. He placed his hands over the wound in Aki's side. A soft, green chakra, a pale imitation of the medical ninjutsu Sakura and his grandmother had taught him, enveloped his hands. It wasn't a healing jutsu, not really. He didn't have that level of fine control anymore. But it was pure, refined life energy. He poured it into Aki, not to heal the wound, but to stabilize it. To stop the bleeding, to reinforce the damaged tissues. To keep him alive until real medics could arrive. Aki's breathing steadied. The bleeding slowed to a trickle. By the time the first public safety cars screeched to a halt outside, Aki was out of immediate danger. Agents swarmed the scene, their faces a mixture of shock at the devastation and awe at the lone, blonde figure standing in the center of it. They saw the hole in the wall, the unconscious Katana Man being pulled from the rubble. The dead woman, the stabilized Aki, and the unconscious Himeno. And they saw Naruto, covered in dust, his clothes torn, standing guard over his fallen comrades. A senior agent, a grizzled man with a face like a roadmap of old scars, approached him, gun drawn but pointed at the floor. What happened here? What did you do? Naruto looked at the agent, then at the defeated form of Katana Man being cuffed by other agents. He's a human-devil hybrid. Defeated, not dead. Take him into custody. The agent's eyes narrowed. The official directive for hostiles his threat level is termination on sight. Finish it. It was the rule. The brutal, pragmatic law of their world. A defeated threat was still a threat. Naruto stepped between the agent and Katana Man. His expression was weary, but his stance was unshakable. No, he said, his voice quiet but ringing with an authority that made the armed men hesitate. I'm not an executioner. We capture him, we interrogate him. We learn who he's working for. Killing him now is just weakness disguised as strength. We're supposed to be better than this. He was openly defying a direct order and the entire ethos of public safety. He was imposing his own morality on their world, right here in the ruins of a ramen shop, surrounded by armed men who could, by all rights, declare him a hostile and open fire. But no one moved. They had all felt the residue of the power he had unleashed. They had seen the result. No one was willing to challenge the being that could punch a man through 2 concrete walls. From the back of the crowd, a familiar, serene voice cut through the tension. He's right. Makima stepped through the cordon of agents, her placid smile firmly in place. But her eyes, her strange, ringed golden eyes, were fixed on Naruto, and they were blazing with an intensity that was almost frightening. It was a look of profound, ecstatic discovery. She had given him a test in the shipyard. He had sidestepped it. Here, in a moment of crisis, he had revealed his true nature. Not just his power, which was beyond anything she had ever imagined, but his will. An indomitable, unshakable will that could bend the rules of their world through sheer, overwhelming presence. He wasn't a piece on the board. He was a player, a king, her king. Naruto-kun acted to preserve a valuable intelligence asset, she announced. Her voice resonating with authority. His actions, while unorthodox, were in the best interests of public safety. Secure the prisoners. Get the wounded to the hospital. Now. The agents, given an order they could understand from a commander they feared, scrambled to obey. Makima walked over to Naruto, her heels clicking on the debris-strewn floor. She stopped in front of him, her gaze sweeping over his torn clothes, the exhaustion on his face, the sheer power that still seemed to cling to him like an afterimage. You have exceeded all of my expectations, Naruto-kun, she said, her voice a low, intimate purr. All of them. Her desire for him had, in that moment, transformed. It was no longer about possessing a powerful, unknown tool. It was about standing beside a power that could rival her own. About binding this untamable, golden force to her side. The political fallout from his public defiance was not a problem, it was a gift. It was a new, wonderful leash she could use. A way to isolate him further, to make him rely on her protection alone. Naruto just looked at her, then back at his friends being loaded into ambulances. I just did what I had to do. Hours later, in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling corridor of a public safety hospital, Naruto sat on a hard plastic chair, his head in his hands. He had given his report. He had been debriefed, analyzed, and scanned. Now, all he could do was wait. Aki was in surgery. Denji, miraculously, was alive. His hybrid nature meant he could recover from almost anything given enough blood. He was sleeping it off in the devil recovery ward. A soft footstep approached. He looked up. It was Himeno. She was pale, wearing a standard-issue hospital gown, an IV drip trailing from her arm. But she was on her feet. She was alive. She stood in front of him for a moment, her one good eye searching his face. He looked so young, so tired. The doctors said, "The ghost devil is gone," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. Not the contract. The devil itself. It fled. It broke the pact from its side. It was afraid of you. Naruto just nodded, too tired to explain. They also said Aki is stable, she continued. The energy treatment you gave him kept him from bleeding out on the way here. You saved his life. She paused, her throat working. You saved my life. He looked up at her pale, drawn face, and saw the raw, naked emotion in her eye. I told you, he said, his voice rough. I don't let my comrades die. That includes you dying by your own hand. Tears welled in her eye, spilling down her cheek. But they weren't the black tears of grief from the ramen shop. They were clear. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently touched his cheek. His skin was warm, vibrant, so full of life it felt like touching the sun. You pulled me back, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. You really pulled me back from the edge. She leaned down and, before he could react, she pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a seductive kiss, or a teasing one. It was a kiss of profound, desperate, overwhelming gratitude. It was the kiss of a woman who had been ready to die and had been given a reason to live. It was chaste, and brief. But it held the weight of a lifetime. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his. "Thank you, Naruto," she whispered, the words a sacred vow. "Thank you for showing me there was another way." He didn't know what to say. He just sat there, her hand on his cheek, her presence a warm, living comfort in the cold, sterile hallway. He had failed to save so many people in his life. But today, he had saved her, and in the quiet, shared space between them, that felt like the only victory that mattered. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A leash of silk, a bond of blood. The movie theater was dark and cool, a cavernous space that smelled of stale popcorn, cheap soda, and the collective, held breath of a captivated audience. On the screen, a ridiculously handsome actor professed his undying love to a teary-eyed actress in the pouring rain. It was sappy, predictable, and utterly divorced from the grim reality of the world outside. Naruto found it fascinating. He sat in the plush velvet seat, a large bucket of popcorn balanced on his lap. He wasn't watching the movie so much as observing the reactions of the woman sitting beside him. Makima. She had called it a debriefing. A chance to discuss the Katana Man incident in a more relaxed setting. But there were no files, no agents, no sterile office. Just the two of them, in the back row of a matinee showing of a popular romance film. Makima watched the screen with a look of intense, analytical curiosity, as if she were studying a foreign species. Her serene smile was in place, but she would occasionally tilt her head, a small frown creasing her brow, as if puzzled by the on-screen emotions. "I don't understand," she whispered to Naruto, her voice a low murmur that was easily lost in the movie's swelling orchestral score. "The protagonists have endangered their lives, compromised their careers, and betrayed their families, all for a statistically volatile emotional response. It's illogical. It's not supposed to be logical," Naruto whispered back, grabbing a handful of popcorn. "It's love. You feel it. You don't calculate it. Feel it." She repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. Her golden, ringed eyes slid from the screen to him. In the flickering darkness, her gaze was hypnotic. "Is that what you feel for your comrades, Naruto-kun? For Himeno-san?" The question was a scalpel, disguised as casual conversation. It was a direct probe into the nature of his actions, his motivations. Naruto met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I care about them. I'd do anything to protect them. If that's love, then yeah. I guess so. Anything." Makima pressed, leaning a little closer. The scent of her, something clean and vaguely floral like rain on cold stone, washed over him. "You would defy orders. You would unleash a power that could level this city. You would make enemies of the entire world, all for them." Without hesitation, he answered, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. A slow, genuine smile spread across Makima's face. It was different from her usual placid mask. This one was full of a predatory, triumphant delight. Wonderful, she breathed. She had him now, she thought. She understood the core of his being. His strength wasn't just the nine-tailed beast sealed within him. It was his bonds. They were his power source, his motivation, his greatest strength. And his greatest weakness. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a silken, conspiratorial whisper, "your actions at the ramen shop have caused complications. The higher-ups are frightened. They don't like unaccountable power. They see you as a threat, a rogue weapon that needs to be controlled or dismantled." She let the words hang in the air, a clear, unspoken threat. "But I see you differently," she continued, her hand moving from the armrest to rest gently on his knee. Her touch was light, but it carried an impossible weight. "I see a protector, a hero. I can shield you from the bureaucracy, Naruto-kun. I can ensure you have the freedom to act as you see fit. I can give you a world where you and your friends are safe, where no one can touch you." She leaned in, her lips almost touching his ear. "Stay with me. Pledge your strength to my cause. All I ask for in return is you. Your power, your loyalty, bound to me, and me alone. Together, we could change everything." It was her most direct gambit yet. Not a leash of iron, but one of silk. A cage built of protection and promises. She wasn't just offering him a deal, she was offering him a partnership, a kingdom. She would be the mind, he would be the heart. She would control the world, and he would protect what mattered to him within it. It was, from her perspective, the perfect proposal. Naruto was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the screen where the two lovers were now kissing passionately. He felt the weight of her hand on his knee, the immense, terrifying power she held just beneath her skin, the sheer force of her will. He understood the offer perfectly. It was security. It was safety. It was everything a person lost in a strange world should want. He turned his head, his face just inches from hers. Her strange, beautiful eyes held a universe of control, a vortex of ambition. And he gently, but firmly, removed her hand from his knee. "You don't win loyalty by putting a leash on someone, Makima," he said. His voice soft but resolute. "It doesn't matter if the leash is made of iron or silk. It's still a leash." He looked her directly in the eye, his own blue gaze clear and unwavering. "You earn it, and you don't earn it from me by trying to own me." For the first time since he had met her, Makima was speechless. A flicker of genuine, raw emotion crossed her face. It was a complex storm of frustration, disbelief, and something else, something that looked shockingly like hurt. He had not just rejected her offer, he had rejected the very foundation of her worldview. In her life, everything and everyone could be controlled, owned, or broken. This man, this impossible, golden man, refused to be any of them. He had looked at the perfect, gilded cage she had built for him and simply said, "No, thank you." Before the heavy silence between them could solidify, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a text from Aki. "Hostile devil, Cafe Terrace, downtown. Moving now. You and Power are closest." Naruto stood up, the spell of the dark theater broken. "Sorry," he said to Makima, his tone polite but firm. "Work calls." Makima didn't answer. She just stared at him, her mask of serene control shattered, leaving a rare, fascinating glimpse of the lonely, obsessive being beneath. He gave her a final, unreadable look before turning and walking up the aisle, the bucket of popcorn still in his hand. As he pushed through the heavy doors into the bright lobby, he offered the popcorn to a startled-looking usher. "Enjoy the movie," he said, before breaking into a run. Makima remained in the darkness, alone. The rejection was a devastating blow, not to her plans, but to her ego, to the very core of her being. It forced her to consider a possibility she had never entertained. That to get what she truly wanted, her methods might have to change. Her desire to control him was now at war with a burgeoning, infuriating, and undeniable respect. And perhaps, just perhaps, the first stirrings of a genuine affection she was entirely unequipped to understand. The Cafe Terrace was a scene of pandemonium. Tables were overturned, umbrellas shattered. People were screaming, running in every direction. In the center of the chaos stood a young woman who looked like she had stepped out of a dream. She had short, dark hair, a mischievous smile, and a choker around her neck with a small pin. Like the pin from a grenade, she wore a simple waitress uniform that was now spattered with blood. Her name was Reese, and she moved with the fluid grace of a dancer and the explosive lethality of a bomb. A devil hunter lunged at her with a contracted blade. She giggled, a light, musical sound, and pirouetted out of the way. She touched his chest with the tip of her finger. "Boom," she whispered. The hunter's torso erupted in a contained but powerful explosion, sending him flying backward in a shower of gore. Power arrived on the scene first, skidding to a halt on a motor cycle she had liberated from a terrified civilian. Naruto landed silently on a nearby rooftop a moment later, having taken a more direct route. "A new challenger appears," Power bellowed, pointing a bloody finger at Reese. "Do you know who I am? I am the magnificent Power. Tremble before my..." Reese looked up at her, a playful, curious glint in her eyes. "A blood fiend. How cute." She put a finger to her chin. "I wonder what happens when you heat up blood really, really fast." She snapped her fingers. Power, who had been puffing out her chest in a display of dominance, suddenly shrieked. The blood that formed her very being, the vital fluid that flowed through her veins, began to heat up, threatening to boil. It was an agonizing, internal assault. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest, a sound of pure pain escaping her lips. Reese hadn't even moved. "Power!" Naruto yelled from the rooftop. This was bad. This devil's ability was a hard counter to a blood fiend. He was about to jump down. But Rize's attention snapped to him instantly. Her playful smile widened. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "There you are. The primal anomaly. My real target." She ignored the whimpering power. Her gaze locked on Naruto. "My masters send their regards. They're very eager to meet you." "Your masters?" Naruto called down, his mind racing. "The apostates of nothing. Or someone else. Who are you?" "My name is Rize," she said with a theatrical bow. "And I'm here to take you home with me." She winked. "To Russia, with love." The USSR. Another global power moving in on the strange new piece on the board. The Germans had failed. Now the Soviets were trying a different approach. Not a smash and grab, but a targeted, seductive extraction. "I'm not going anywhere," Naruto said, his body tensing. "Oh, I think you are," Rize said, her smile turning wicked. She pulled the pin from her choker. "I can be very persuasive." Her head exploded. It was not an act of suicide. It was a transformation. Her body contorted, wrapped in explosive force and shrapnel. Where her head had been, a torpedo-like bomb casing materialized, her human face a ghostly mask on its surface. Her arms became chains of dynamite. She was the bomb devil, a walking, talking weapon of mass destruction. "Let's dance." Her voice echoed, metallic and distorted. She launched herself into the air, propelled by a controlled explosion from her feet, rocketing towards Naruto's rooftop position. Naruto met her head-on. The rooftop became a battleground. It was a fight of brutal speed and devastating power. Rize was unlike any opponent he'd faced here. She was fast, agile, and her every movement was an attack. A kick was a concussive blast. A punch was a shaped charge. Naruto flowed around her, a whirlwind of evasion and redirection. He couldn't afford to take a direct hit. He used his clones to harry her, to create openings, but she would simply detonate them with a gesture, laughing as they dissolved into smoke. The fight spilled from the rooftops to the streets below. It was a running, chaotic battle that tore a swath of destruction through the city block. Cars were thrown through the air, storefronts were shattered. The very asphalt cracked and buckled under the force of their clash. Aki and the rest of the squad arrived, trying to contain the chaos and evacuate civilians. "What is that thing?" Aki yelled, dodging a piece of flying shrapnel. "The bomb devil," Himeno shouted back, using her ghost arm to pull a trapped family out of a crushed car. "Looks like a state-sponsored weapon. She's after Naruto." They could only watch, helpless. The fight was on a level they couldn't possibly interfere with. It was a battle of monsters. Down on the street, power had managed to cool her blood, but she was weakened. Shaky, she watched Naruto fighting, saw him taking this incredible risk, saw this new, terrifying woman trying to take him away. And a feeling she couldn't name, a hot, possessive, feral rage, welled up inside her. He was hers. He was her human. He made her bacon. He taught her to flush. He had stood between her and the memory eater. He was the anchor of her strange new life. And this explosive bitch was not going to have him. "You can't have him," Power screamed, her voice raw with a fury that surprised even herself. "He's mine. He's our Naruto." Fueled by this pure, simple, protective instinct, she rose to her feet. Blood, thick and dark, poured from her wrists. But she didn't form a simple hammer or spear. She began to weave it, shaping it with a desperate, newfound creativity. She created a torrent of hundreds of tiny, razor-sharp blood spears, a crimson storm that she sent hurtling towards Rize. "Thousand-year blood rain," she shrieked, giving her new, glorious technique a suitably magnificent name. Rize, who had just managed to corner Naruto, was forced to detonate a massive explosion around herself to vaporize the incoming storm of blood. The blast threw Naruto clear, giving him the opening he needed. He saw power, standing defiant and proud amidst the chaos, a fierce, protective snarl on her face. He saw Himeno and Aki working to save people, putting themselves at risk. He saw Makima's offer of a safe, silken cage, and he saw this, the chaotic, dangerous, but real bond he had forged with these broken, beautiful people. He knew what he had to do. Rize reformed from the smoke, her bomb head turning to glare at Power. "Annoying little pest. I'll deal with you later." "No," a voice said from behind her. "You'll deal with me now." Naruto stood there, his hands held in front of him. But he wasn't making a sign. He was cupping them, and within them, a terrifying power was gathering. A spinning vortex of golden chakra, just like his Rasengan, but it was being warped. Twisted. A high-pitched, whining shriek filled the air as raw, untamed chakra was forced into the sphere. 4 large, blade-like points of wind-natured chakra erupted from the sphere. Spinning at impossible speeds, it was a miniature hurricane, a shrieking star of pure annihilation held in his hands. Rasenshuriken, a technique he hadn't used in years. A Tekken, IQ so dangerous it damaged the user almost as much as the target. But his body here was different. Stronger. And Kurama was lending his power, stabilizing the vortex. What is that? Rize asked. AF. Liquor of genuine apprehension in her distorted voice. She could feel the sheer density of the power he was holding. A goodbye present, Naruto said, his expression grim. He threw it. The Rasenshuriken flew through the air, not as a projectile, but as a living storm. It expanded as it traveled, the shriek becoming a deafening, world-ending roar. It wasn't just cutting, it was disintegrating on a microscopic level, severing the very bonds between molecules. Rize tried to counter it with her own explosion, her biggest one yet. The two forces met in the middle of the street. For a moment, there was only silence. A perfect, terrifying silence as the two opposing forces canceled each other out. Then, the Rasenshuriken won. It tore through the explosion, shredding it into nothingness, and engulfed Rize. There was no grand boom. Only the high-pitched shriek of a billion tiny blades cutting everything at once. Rize's screams were lost in the sound. Her bomb form, her human form, her very contract was being shredded at a cellular level. When the storm of blades finally dissipated, Rize lay in a crater in the center of the street. She was back in her human form, her clothes shredded, her body covered in millions of microscopic cuts. She was alive, but barely. Her devil regeneration was working furiously, but it couldn't keep up with the scale of the damage. She was defeated, utterly. Naruto stood over her, breathing heavily. The Rasenshuriken hadn't damaged his arm, but it had taken a massive toll on his chakra reserves. Rize looked up at him, a bloody, genuine smile on her face. Wow, she coughed, spitting up blood. You really are something special. She looked past him, at the approaching public safety agents. So, you're not going to kill me? No, Naruto said, his voice firm. I'm not an executioner. Quote. He turned his back on her, walking away as Aki and his team moved in to secure her. He walked straight to Power, who was looking at him with wide, adoring eyes. He stopped in front of her and, without a word, he reached out and ruffled her hair, a gesture of affection that was almost brotherly. That was a pretty great attack, he said, a tired smile on his face. You saved me. Power's chest puffed out, her earlier weakness forgotten. Of course I did. I am the magnificent Power. And you are my subordinate. Yes, my first and most important subordinate. It is my duty to protect my underlings. It was the only way she knew how to articulate the powerful, protective loyalty she felt. It was clumsy and arrogant, but it was genuine. And Naruto understood it perfectly. He just chuckled, turning to face the rest of his team. Himeno gave him a thumbs up and a wide, relieved grin. Aki just gave a short, sharp nod, the highest praise he was capable of offering. They were a mess. They were dysfunctional, but they were his team. And they were safe. That evening, Naruto sat in his sterile apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. He was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. There was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Makima standing there. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was neutral, unreadable, but her eyes held a new depth, a new complexity. The Soviet Union has officially lodged a protest, she said, her voice flat. They're demanding the return of their lost asset. The higher-ups are in a panic. And what are you going to do? Naruto asked. I am going to tell them, she said, her gaze intense, that Rize is a ward of Public Safety Japan, under my personal protection. I am going to tell the Soviets that if they want her back, they will have to start a war they cannot win. She took a step closer. I am doing this for you, Naruto-kun. To protect you from the fallout. To keep your new rival from ever bothering you again. She was still trying to build her cage, but the bars were different now. They weren't made of promises of safety, but of shared enemies and political machinations. She was positioning herself as his shield against the world. You don't have to do that, Naruto said. I know, she replied, her voice softening. This world is a dangerous place. You've made powerful enemies. Let me be your ally. Not your master, your ally. Let me help you. It was a concession, a change in tactics, a shocking admission that her previous method had failed. She was learning. She was adapting. Naruto looked at her, at the most dangerous woman in the world offering him a partnership born of obsession. He thought of Power's feral, protective scream. He thought of Himeno's quiet trust on the rooftop. His life here was a chaotic, tangled mess of complicated loyalties and terrifying threats. All right, Makima, he said with a sigh. Ally. For now. A real, genuine smile touched her lips. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. She hadn't leashed him, but she had tethered him. For now, it was enough. As she turned to leave, she paused. The interrogation of the captured apostate has yielded something. He kept repeating a phrase. The great silence is coming. He said it is a primal fear. A devil that embodies the terror of non-existence. Of being forgotten. Naruto's blood ran cold. The whisper from the alley. The final words of Akane's snake. The warning from the German soldier. It was all coalescing into a single, terrifying shape. He said, Makima continued, her voice grim, that your presence, your very existence, is like a loud, defiant noise in a quiet room. And that you are accelerating its arrival. She left him alone with that chilling prophecy. He was not just a target. He was a catalyst for a world-ending threat. The stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level, and he was standing right at the epicenter. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Void. The world had gone quiet. It started as a minor report, a single line in a morning intelligence briefing that most would have dismissed as a clerical error. The remote mountain village of Omagadoki, nestled deep in the forests of Gunma Prefecture, population 237, had gone dark. Not just dark, it had vanished. The local devil hunter outpost had missed 2 scheduled check-ins. Phone lines were dead. The single road leading to it was blocked by a sudden, inexplicable rockslide. A public safety helicopter sent to investigate reported nothing but pristine, unbroken forest where the village should have been. Satellite imagery confirmed it. The farms, the houses, the single Shinto shrine on the hill, all gone. In their place stood ancient, towering cedar trees that looked as if they had been there for 1,000 years. There were no signs of a struggle. No craters, no scorch marks, no lingering devil energy. It was not destruction. It was erasure. In the bustling headquarters of Special Division 4, the incident was causing a ripple of confusion. It has to be a mapping error, an analyst said, staring at his screen in disbelief. Maybe the village was decommissioned years ago and someone forgot to update the National Registry. 237 people don't just decommission themselves, another countered, frantically typing. I'm checking census records, tax files, nothing. It's like Omagadoki never existed. The other hunters in the room murmured, a sense of unease settling over them. They were used to gore, to violence, to the tangible horrors of devils. This was something else. This was a quiet, clinical wrongness that defied their understanding. Aki, Himeno, and Power stood near the main briefing board, looking at the satellite photos. Maybe a devil ate the whole town. Power suggested, looking more intrigued than concerned. A very, very hungry devil. I would be impressed. A devil that powerful would leave a trace, Aki said. His brow furrowed in concentration. A massive energy signature, residual demonic essence, something. This is clean. Too clean. It's creepy, Himeno muttered, lighting a cigarette. Her hand was steady, but her eye darted nervously around the room. The clean, silent nature of the threat felt more unnerving than any monster. It's like someone just deleted it from the world. Only Naruto was not looking at the screens. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He remembered seeing the name, Omagadoki, just last week. It was a low-priority mission request that had come across his desk. A report of strange animal disappearances. He had bookmarked it, thinking it might be a good, simple mission to take Denji on for training. He remembered looking it up on a map, tracing the winding mountain road with his finger. He remembered the crisp, satellite photo of the small cluster of houses nestled in the green valley. He remembered it all with perfect, gut-wrenching clarity. And no one else did. Naruto. Himeno's voice cut through his trance. She was looking at him with concern. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, he whispered, his voice hoarse. He walked towards the briefing board, his movements stiff. It was there. The village. I saw it. I saw the mission request. The analyst at the main terminal turned in his chair. What request? There's nothing in the system for a location named Omagadoki. No active or archived files. There was, Naruto insisted, his voice rising with a frantic urgency. I saw it. I read it. A report about missing livestock. He looked around at his teammates. At Aki's confused frown. At Himeno's worried expression. At Power's utter incomprehension. They were looking at him like he was crazy. The world had changed, and he was the only one who knew it had been different before. It was a profoundly isolating, terrifying feeling, like screaming in a soundproof room. He grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. His hand shaking, he sketched a rough map of the area from memory. The road was here. The shrine was on this hill, overlooking the valley. Main cluster of houses was by the river. He drew with a desperate precision, trying to prove his own sanity. Aki looked at the drawing, then back at the satellite photo on the screen. Naruto, this is just dense forest. There's no river. There's no hill like the one you drew. Naruto stared at the screen, then at his own drawing. They didn't match. Not just the village. The entire geography was different. The river he remembered was gone. The hill had been flattened into a gentle slope. It wasn't just that the village had been erased. Reality itself had been rewritten. And he was the only one who remembered the previous draft. A cold dread washed over him. The whisper. The great silence. The terror of non-existence. This was it. This was its power. It didn't just kill. It unmade. No, 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 he muttered. Backing away from the board, running a hand through his hair. It was real. I know it was real. The other hunters exchanged worried glances. Their powerful, unshakable new teammate was coming apart at the seams. Ranting about a town that never existed. Maybe you dreamed it, human. Power offered, trying to be helpful in her own way. I once dreamed I was a magnificent carrot. It felt very real. It wasn't a dream. Naruto snapped, his voice cracking. He felt a wave of dizziness, the ground seeming to shift beneath his feet. The certainty of his own memory was at war. The unanimous reality presented by everyone and everything around him. For a horrifying second, he wondered if they were right. Was he losing his mind? Then, a hand rested gently on his shoulder. I believe you. He turned. It was Makima. She had entered the room so silently no one had noticed. Her face was devoid of its usual smile. Her expression was grim, her golden, ringed eyes filled with a chilling, profound seriousness he had never seen before. Everyone, back to your duties, she commanded, her voice quiet but carrying an absolute authority that sent the other hunters scrambling away, leaving just the 5 of them. She turned her full attention to Naruto. My ability, she said, her voice low, allows me to know the names of things. To feel them. Where Omagadoki village is supposed to be, there is a hole. An absence. It is not an empty space. It is a null space. A piece of the world that has been redacted. I can't see what was there, but I can feel that something was. Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over Naruto. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't alone in this. You feel it too. I feel its absence, she corrected. You, however, seem to remember its presence. Your very existence, your memory, is resisting the change. You are an anchor to a reality that no longer is. Her eyes held a flicker of something he hadn't expected, fear. Not for herself, but a deep, existential dread of the force they were facing. This is a primal fear, Naruto-kun. More powerful than the gun devil. More absolute than darkness. This is a conceptual weapon. Aki and Himeno listened, their faces pale. The scale of this was beyond anything they had ever conceived. So what do we do? Himeno asked, her cigarette forgotten in her fingers. How do you fight something that erases you from existence? We go there, Naruto said, his voice regaining its strength. His fear was receding, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had an enemy, a tangible, if incomprehensible, one. That was a battlefield he understood. We go to the blank spot. It's the only lead we have. Makima nodded slowly. It's a reckless gamble. We don't know what we will find there. The effect could be stronger at the epicenter. It's the only move we have, Naruto insisted. We can't just sit here and wait for another town to get deleted. Makima looked at him, at the fire of defiance returning to his eyes. He was afraid, yes. But he was pushing through it, turning it into fuel. Her brief moment of fear subsided, replaced by a cold fascination. Even faced with a god of nothingness, his first instinct was to charge forward. Very well, she said. Aki, Himeno, power. You will accompany him. I will run interference with the higher-ups and coordinate from here. She gave them a grim look. You will be completely cut off. No radio, no support. We don't know if this thing can travel through communications. Be prepared for anything. And, be careful. There was a genuine note of concern in her voice, a rare crack in her manipulative facade. This enemy was not a piece on her board. It was a force that threatened to shatter the board itself. And for the first time, her most valuable piece was walking in. To a battle she could not control or even fully comprehend. The air in the Gunma forest was heavy and unnaturally still. The usual chorus of birdsong and insect chatter was absent. A deep, oppressive silence hung under the canopy of ancient cedars, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight on the eardrums. Naruto, Aki, Himeno, and Power walked through the twilight woods, their boots unching on a thick carpet of moss and fallen needles. The GPS in Aki's hand was useless. The screen just showed a blank, gray void for their current location. They were navigating by Naruto's memory alone. This is it, Naruto said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to be swallowed by the silence. The forest is right, but it feels older. Thicker. I don't like this, Himeno said, her hand resting near her eye patch. It feels like we're in a graveyard. A glorious graveyard, Power declared, though her voice lacked its usual booming confidence. She was sticking unusually close to Naruto, her eyes darting nervously into the deep shadows between the trees. The perfect place for a king to build a new castle. Aki was a coiled spring of tension, his hand never leaving the hilt of his katana. Stay sharp. Anything that can do what it did to that village is not to be underestimated. As they walked deeper, the silence intensified. But it wasn't just a lack of sound. It was an active, encroaching presence. Naruto felt it first, a subtle pressure on his mind. A whisper, soft as falling dust, brushed against his thoughts. Why make a sound, when silence is so peaceful? He stopped, his head snapping up. Did you hear that? Hear what? Aki asked, turning to him. I don't hear anything. But as he spoke, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He blinked. Wait, who was I just talking to? He looked at Naruto, his expression blank for a terrifying second before recognition returned. Naruto. Right, sorry, my mind just slipped. Himeno swayed on her feet, her hand flying to her head. Whoa, major head rush. She looked at the cigarette in her hand. When did I light this? The whispers were growing stronger, a chorus of soft, sibilant voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They weren't audible, they were psychic, targeting the mind directly. A memory is a burden, let it go. A name is a chain, be free. Power suddenly stopped and sniffed the air. Bacon, she said, a look of pure confusion on her face. Why am I thinking about bacon? She looked at Naruto, her brow furrowed. Did you make me bacon this morning? The memory was fuzzy, indistinct, like a photograph left out in the sun. I did, Naruto said, his voice tight. The attack was insidious. It wasn't erasing long-term memories, not yet. It was fraying the edges of their short-term recall, creating confusion, doubt, and panic. It was unmaking their present, moment by moment. We need to keep moving, Naruto ordered, his own mind a fortress against the whispers. His memory, anchored by the sheer, overwhelming presence of Kurama within him, was a rock in the eroding stream. He was the only one who remained perfectly lucid. And keep talking. Don't let the silence in. Aki, what was our mission objective? To investigate the blank spot, Aki answered, his voice hesitant. He had to actively search for the memory. Himeno, what did you have for breakfast? Naruto pressed. Coffee. No, sake. I think, she stammered, her hand trembling. The simple act of recollection was becoming a monumental effort. Power. Who is the greatest, most magnificent being in the universe? Me. Power shrieked, the familiar declaration a defiant roar against the encroaching emptiness. The act of proclaiming her own ego seemed to solidify her thoughts for a moment. They stumbled forward, a chaotic, desperate process. Naruto became their external memory, their anchor to reality, constantly asking them questions, forcing them to recall names, events, feelings. He was fighting a psychological war on behalf of his entire team. They broke through a line of trees and found it. The epicenter. It was not a crater. It was a perfectly circular clearing, 100 yards in diameter. The ground was not dirt or moss, but a smooth, gray, featureless substance that seemed to absorb the light. It was utterly flat, utterly empty. And in the center of the clearing stood a single figure. He was a man, or what looked like a man. He was tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned black suit. His skin was the color of ash, his hair a wispy, colorless white. He had no discernible face. His features were a smooth, blurred mask of flesh, as if his identity had been smudged out. He stood perfectly still, his head bowed, radiating an aura of absolute nullity. This was not a devil hunter. This was a herald, a priest of the void. And he was not alone. Around him, shambling at the edge of the gray clearing, were other figures. They were the villagers of Omagadoki. Or what was left of them. Their bodies were twisted, their limbs elongated into sharp, insectoid points. Their faces were gone, replaced by the same smooth, featureless masks. They were puppets, husks animated by the silence. The central figure slowly raised his head. When he spoke, the sound was not a voice, but the collected whispers they had been hearing, now focused into a single, chilling monologue. Less than noise, greater than the voice echoed in their minds. Less than you have come. The cacophony made flesh. The loud one. Greater than. Who are you? Naruto demanded, stepping forward, positioning himself in front of his disoriented teammates. Less than I am the speaker for the end, greater than the voice whispered. Less than I am the first apostle of the great silence. I am Satori. I was once a man who saw the truth. That all of existence is pain. Every memory, a scar. Every bond, a cage. Every sound, a scream. The silence is the only true mercy. The final, perfect rest. The ultimate salvation is to be unmade. Greater than. As he spoke, the husk-like villagers began to shamble forward, their sharp limbs clicking on the gray ground. Get ready, Naruto yelled to his team. Aki raised his katana, his stance wavering. Himeno summoned a single, translucent arm of the ghost devil, but it looked weak, insubstantial. Power bared her teeth, but she was trembling, the whispers eroding her bravado. You cannot fight what is not there, Satori's voice echoed. You cannot kill what is already nothing. The husks didn't attack with their claws. They advanced, and the whispers intensified, focusing on a single target. Aki Hayakawa, the voice whispered. Burrowing into his mind, you made a contract with the fox devil to gain the power to kill the gun devil. A vendetta, a heavy burden. Lay it down. Forget the gun. Forget your hate. It will be so peaceful. Aki grunted, his eyes glazing over, his grip on his katana slackened. The gun, he muttered, his driving purpose dissolving like sugar in water. Himeno, the voice purred, shifting its attention. All your partners die. It is a curse. You carry their ghosts. So much guilt. So much pain. Let them go. Forget their faces. Forget their names. Forget you ever cared. Himeno cried out, stumbling to her knees. The ghost arm vanished. The memory of her fallen comrades, the source of her pain but also her strength, was being systematically erased. No, Naruto roared. He knew he couldn't fight them all. He had to cut off the source. He had to take down Satori. He formed a Rasengan in his hand, the golden sphere a defiant sun against the encroaching gray. He charged. But as he ran, Satori simply held up a hand. Less than your power is noise. It is presence. It is a memory of another world. A beautiful, loud song. But even the greatest song must end. Greater than. A wave of pure silence, a tangible wall of nothingness, slammed into Naruto. It wasn't a physical blow. It was an attack on his very being. His Rasengan flickered and died, the chakra vortex unraveling. The whispers focused on him. A billion soft voices trying to tear down the fortress of his mind. Naruto Uzumaki, son of the 4th Hokage. Jinchuriki of the 9 Tails. Hero of the 4th Great Ninja War. So many names, so many memories. Such a heavy burden. Images flashed through his mind, unbidden. The swing set of his lonely childhood. Iruka's smile. The sting of Sasuke's betrayal. The weight of Jiraiya's dead body. The roar of the 10 Tails. The final clash in the Valley of the End. The faces of all the people he had saved, and all the people he had failed. It all leads to pain, to loss, to loneliness in a new, strange world. Wouldn't it be easier to just forget? For a terrifying, seductive moment, he felt the appeal. To let go of the pain, the guilt, the crushing weight of 2 lifetimes of struggle. To just be quiet. His knees buckled, his vision swam. The golden fire of his will began to flicker, threatening to be extinguished by the suffocating, peaceful void. He was losing. Then, a new voice cut through the whispers. It was not a whisper. It was a scream. No, you can't have him. He's the one who makes the bacon. Power, driven by the most fundamental and important memory she had left, the taste of a good breakfast, lashed out. A massive spear of blood, forged from sheer, primal hunger and a bizarrely fierce loyalty, shot past Naruto and slammed into the line of advancing husks. It didn't kill them, but it sent them scattering, momentarily breaking their concentration. At the same time, Himeno, on her knees, looked up. Her own memories were shredded, but she saw Naruto, her golden boy, faltering. And the memory of his hand pulling her back from the brink, the memory of his kiss in the hospital hallway, the feeling of his promise to live, it was not a memory of the mind, but of the soul. It was a truth deeper than any whisper could erase. Ghost, she screamed, pouring the last of her will into the command. A single, desperate, spectral hand erupted from the ground and grabbed Satori's leg, holding him in place for a fraction of a second. That was all Naruto needed. The voices of his friends, their desperate, defiant actions, were the lifeline he needed. They were his anchor. He wasn't just Naruto Uzumaki, hero of a forgotten world. He was Power's bacon cook. He was Himeno's reason to see tomorrow. He was Aki's begrudging, respected teammate. He was not alone, and his bonds were not a burden. They were his armor. A roar, not of a fox, but of a man, tore from his throat. A new wave of golden chakra exploded from him, brighter and more defiant than ever before. He pushed the whispers out of his head, his will reforged in the fires of his new connections. He looked at Satori, held fast by Himeno's ghost, and his eyes blazed with a cold, clear fury. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Memories aren't a burden. They're what make us who we are. The pain, the joy, all of it. It's the proof that we lived." He charged again, but he didn't form a Rasengan. He just ran, his fist cocked back, his entire being, every memory, every bond from 2 worlds, focused into a single point. Satori, for the first time, seemed to feel something akin to fear. Less than impossible. Such noise, such stubborn, pointless noise, greater than. Naruto's fist, glowing with a simple, pure, golden light, slammed into Satori's featureless face. There was no grand explosion. There was only a single, pure, resonant note, like a temple bell being struck. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated presence. It was the sound of Naruto's will, his very soul, impacting the void. Satori's ashen body did not bleed. It cracked. Fissures of golden light spread across his form, like a clay statue breaking apart. He let out a final, sighing whisper that echoed in all their minds. Less than the silence is eternal, greater than. Then, he disintegrated into a cloud of fine, gray dust that was scattered by a sudden breeze. As he vanished, the husk-like villagers collapsed, the bodies rapidly decaying into mounds of ancient-looking soil. The gray, featureless ground of the clearing cracked, and with a low groan, green grass and wildflowers began to push their way through. As if life itself was rushing back in to fill the void. The oppressive silence shattered. The sound of the forest, The chatter of insects, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves in the wind, returned in a sudden, joyous rush. Naruto stood panting in the center of the now living clearing. His friends were collapsed on the ground, groggy and disoriented, but alive. Their memories, frayed but not erased, began to knit themselves back together. What happened? Aki groaned, pushing himself up. We won, Naruto said, his voice filled with exhaustion. He looked around at the rejuvenated forest. He had faced down the avatar of nothingness and filled it with so much presence, so much life, that it had broken. But Satori's final words echoed in his mind. The silence is eternal. They had defeated a herald, not the god itself. This was just the beginning. He walked over to Himeno and offered her a hand, pulling her to her feet. She leaned against him, her strength spent. Power was already on her feet, marching over to him and pointing a finger at his chest. From now on, you will cook me bacon for every meal. It is the source of my power. It is the ultimate weapon against the quiet creepy guys. Naruto just managed a weak laugh. He was surrounded by his chaotic, broken, but fiercely loyal friends. Makima, with her silken cages of control and alliance, was a world away. Here, in this quiet, reborn forest, surrounded by the people he had just saved and who had, in turn, saved him, he knew what kind of bond he preferred. It wasn't one of ownership or strategy. It was one forged in shared struggle, mutual protection, and the promise of a good breakfast. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Symphony of Destruction. The intel came from two disparate, equally grim sources. The first was Rize, the bomb devil, singing like a canary from her protective custody, under Makima's watch. Faced with the choice between being a pawn for the Soviets or an asset for the woman who could command the seemingly invincible Naruto, she chose the latter. She spoke of whispers in the Russian black market, of a death cult with bottomless resources buying up occult artifacts and recruiting disillusioned devils. All in service to a coming, great silence. The second source was the mind of Satori, or what little psychic residue of it Naruto had been able to absorb in their final confrontation. It wasn't a memory, but an echo. A lingering blueprint of intent. A location. An abandoned subterranean government facility west of Tokyo, designated Arc 07. It was built during the Cold War, a self-sustaining bunker designed to survive nuclear apocalypse. Now, it was a tomb, a forgotten relic. And according to the echoes in Naruto's mind, it was about to become a temple. The apostates of nothing were preparing a ritual. Not just to erase a village, but to amplify the Silence Devil's influence, to create a permanent, expanding dead zone in reality, a foothold for their god on Earth. They were going to anchor the void. There was no time for deliberation, no room for bureaucratic red tape. Makima, using the full extent of her authority and the panic generated by the Omagadoki incident, cut through it all. Special Division 4 was mobilized for a full-scale assault. It was not a hunt. It was a war. The air inside the military transport helicopter was thick with tension and the thrumming of rotor blades. Below, the dark, sprawling forests rushed by. Naruto sat by the open door, the wind whipping through his blonde hair. He was not wearing a standard public safety suit, but his own practical black combat gear. His face was a mask of calm, focused resolve, but inside, Kurama was a coiled spring of incandescent rage. The Silence Devil was the antithesis of their very existence, and the old fox was hungry for a real fight. Across from him, his team prepared. Aki was sharpening his katana, the motion methodical, meditative. His experience in the Forest of Whispers had changed him. The rigid adherence to the rules had been replaced by a grim pragmatism, his trust in Naruto now absolute. Naruto was the anchor, the one who remembered the way home when the world tried to make them forget. Himeno sat beside Aki, cleaning a handgun with practiced efficiency. She was not smoking. Since the incident, she had cut back drastically, her hands now needing to be busy with something other than a cigarette and a lighter. She caught Naruto's eye and offered a small, confident smile. There was no fear in her gaze, only a fierce determination. He had shown her how to live, and now she was ready to fight for that life. Power was a whirlwind of manic energy, strapping knives and small pouches of her own blood to her limbs. Their skulls will make a magnificent throne. Their blood will be my victory wine, she declared to no one in particular. Her bravado was back in full force, but it was different now. Underneath the bluster was a core of unshakable loyalty. Naruto was her leader, her subordinate, her bacon cooker. And anyone who threatened him was a personal enemy of the state of power. They were not just a squad anymore. They were a single, cohesive unit, their individual strengths and neuroses forged into a weapon by shared trauma and Naruto's unwavering presence. "All right, listen up." Naruto's voice cut through the noise of the helicopter, his tone commanding the attention of not just his team, but every devil hunter on board. He stood, a map of the Arc 07 facility spread on a digital tablet. "The facility has one main entrance, heavily fortified. We're not using it." He pointed to a spot on the map. "Intel from Makima's network shows a primary ventilation shaft here, on the eastern ridge. It drops straight down into the lower levels, bypassing the bulk of their defenses. That's our way in. Alpha Team, that's us, goes in fast and hard. Our objective is the main reactor chamber. That's where they'll be conducting the ritual." He looked at the other hardened hunters. "Bravo and Charlie teams, you'll create a diversion at the main entrance. Loud and messy. Draw as many of them as you can. We need you to buy us time." A grizzled veteran from Bravo team grunted. "And what about the head honcho? Makima-san, where's our command and control?" As if on cue, a speaker in the cabin crackled to life. "I am with you." Makima's serene voice filled the space. It was calm, cool, and utterly confident. "I have assets inside the facility. Former employees, contractors with forgotten loyalties. When the time is right, I will turn their own forces against them. I will clear a path for Naruto-kun's strike team. Your job, Alpha Team, is to get to the heart of the problem. My job is to handle the arteries." It was a masterful strategy. A three-pronged assault, a brute force diversion, a surgical strike, and an internal insurrection. Naruto nodded, locking eyes with his team. "You heard her. We're the tip of the spear. No hesitation, no mercy. We end this tonight." The helicopter banked hard, and the gaping maw of the ventilation shaft came into view, a dark circle amidst the trees like the mouth of a hungry god. "Go time," Naruto said. Without another word, he leapt from the helicopter into the darkness below. Aki, Himeno, and Power followed without a flicker of hesitation, a symphony of destruction plunging into the heart of the enemy's fortress. The descent was a dizzying, vertical drop down a massive cylindrical shaft of rusted metal and concrete. They fell in silence, ropes and grapples securing their descent. The only sound was the rush of stale air in the distant, echoing clang of their boots against the walls. They landed on a graded platform 1,000 feet down, in a cavernous chamber filled with the hum of ancient machinery. Emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and dust. "This is Level 3, sub-reactor maintenance," Aki whispered, checking a handheld device. "The main chamber is 2 levels below us. And company's coming," Himeno said, pointing down a long corridor. Figures were emerging from the shadows. Apostates. They wore the same dark, ragged clothes as the husks in the forest. But these were not mindless puppets. They moved with a disciplined, military precision, their faces covered by smooth, white masks that mimicked Satori's featureless visage. They were armed with strange, cruel-looking weapons forged from some dark, non-reflective metal. "No time to be subtle," Naruto said. He held out his hand. "Power." Power grinned, her teeth sharp in the dim light. She ceded her palm with a fang and pressed it into Naruto's. "Drink deep, my loyal underling." Naruto didn't drink. He absorbed. He drew her potent, fiend-blooded life force into his own chakra network, a technique he developed on the fly. It was a shortcut, a way to supplement his own reserves with her chaotic energy. A golden aura, now shot through with streaks of crimson, flared around him. "Let's go," he roared. He charged. The corridor erupted into a whirlwind of violence. Naruto was the vanguard, a blur of gold and red, his fists and feet striking with the force of small explosions. He didn't kill, not at first. He disarmed, disabled, broke limbs, a storm of precise, non-lethal force. Aki was at his right flank. "Khan," he commanded, and the spectral head of his fox devil lunged, swallowy, ing an apostate's strange weapon before it could be fired. Aki followed up, his katana a silver blur, its enchanted blade shearing through the cultist's armor. Himeno took the left. Ghost. An ethereal arm shot from the wall, grabbing the cultist and pulling him, screaming, through the solid concrete. He rematerialized 20 feet away, embedded up to his waist in the floor, dazed and neutralized. He was using her power with a finesse and control she'd never had before, guided by Naruto's tactical call-outs, using the environment itself as a weapon. Power was the artillery. She stayed behind Naruto, a joyous, chaotic grin on her face. Blood scythe barrage, she shrieked, launching a series of spinning sickles made of hardened blood that ricocheted off the walls, hurting enemies into kill zones for Aki and Himeno. They fought as a single, four-headed dragon, a perfect symphony of destruction. Naruto was the brain and the muscle, Aki the sword, Himeno the unseen hand, and Power the roaring fire. They carved a path through the corridor, leaving a trail of broken, groaning bodies in their wake. They reached a massive blast door blocking their path to the stairwell. It's sealed. Aki yelled over the din of approaching reinforcements. It'll take too long to cut through. Don't have to, Naruto yelled back. He placed his hand on the thick steel door. Rasengan. A churning sphere of blue energy appeared in his other hand. He slammed it into the door. The metal screamed, groaned, and then imploded, the vortex of chakra grinding a perfect, man-sized hole through a foot of solid steel. They poured through the opening, Naruto bringing up the rear. As the last one through, he slapped a small, paper tag onto the wall. Seal, he commanded. A complex ink pattern spread from the tag, and the hole he'd just made was sealed with a shimmering barrier of pure chakra. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them time. They clattered down the metal stairs to the next level, the sounds of battle from the main entrance now a faint, distant rumble. They were deep in the belly of the beast. The next level was a series of laboratories and barracks, and it was here that Makima made her move. As a squad of cultists rounded a corner to intercept them, they suddenly froze. Their heads snapped back, their bodies went rigid, and a thin trickle of blood dripped from their noses. Then, as one, they turned and opened fire on their own comrades further down the hall. Makima's voice purred over their comms, laced with amusement. It seems there was a sudden and widespread change of heart among the rank and file. The path to the reactor control room should be clearer now. Naruto watched the controlled puppets fighting, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. Makima's power was terrifying in its subtlety and totality. She didn't just defeat her enemies, she made them her own. For now, that power was aimed in the same direction as his. But the thought of it ever being turned on him, or his friends, was a chilling one. They raced through the ensuing chaos, a pocket of calm in a civil war of Makima's making. They finally reached another massive blast door, this one marked, Reactor Primary Control. This is it, Aki said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Naruto placed a hand on the door. He could feel it on the other side. A vast, cold, empty presence. The ritual was in progress. They've got a devil guarding the door, Himeno said, her one eye wide. A strong one. I can feel the fear. No time to fight it, Naruto said, his mind racing. He looked at Himeno. Can you get us through the wall? The wall is 3 feet of reinforced, lead-lined concrete, she said, shaking her head. Phasing the 4 of us through, it would take too much. I'd be rained before the real fight even starts. You don't have to get us through, Naruto said, a wild idea forming in his mind. You just have to get me close. He looked at her, his expression intense. Trust me. She looked into his clear blue eyes, saw the absolute certainty there, and nodded. Always, golden boy. Aki, power, get ready for a fight the second the door opens, Naruto ordered. Himeno, now. Himeno placed her hand on the concrete wall beside the door. Ghost, she commanded. The spectral arm of the ghost devil appeared, but it didn't lunge or grab. It became still, its hand hovering just inches from the wall. Then, with a surge of Himeno's will, the arm's properties changed. It became a localized zone of intangibility. Naruto placed his hand on the ghost arm. The strange, old sensation of non-existence flowed into him, but he ignored it. He focused, gathering a massive amount of chakra into the palm of his other hand. Rasengan, he whispered, creating the swirling sphere of power. Then, he pushed his Rasengan-wielding arm into the ghost arm. The effect was reality-bending. His physical arm, along with the Rasengan, became spectral, intangible. He then plunged his, now ghostly arm through the 3 feet of solid concrete, the wall offering no more resistance than air. On the other side of the door, a massive, multi-limbed devil, a sentinel born from the fear of containment, stood guard. It sensed the sudden spatial anomaly and turned its many eyes towards the wall. Naruto's intangible arm materialized inside the devil's chest cavity. Release! He yelled to Himeno. She cut the power. The ghost arm vanished. Naruto's arm, and the fully formed Rasengan he held, became solid inside the devil. The devil had a moment of pure, uncomprehending shock. Then, the Rasengan, with nowhere to go, detonated internally. The devil's body swelled, its hide ripping apart from the inside out, and it exploded in a silent, grotesque shower of black gore that painted the control room. On the other side of the door, Naruto pulled his arm back, shaking it out. Doors clear. Aki and Power just stared at him, speechless. That, Aki finally said, his voice filled with awe, was the most insane, brilliant, and reckless thing I have ever seen. It was glorious. Power cheered. A truly underhanded and magnificent tactic. I approve. Himeno leaned against the wall, panting slightly from the effort, a proud, tired smile on her face. Their synergy was becoming something legendary. Naruto slammed the door release panel, and the massive blast doors hissed open, revealing the cavernous main reactor chamber. The room was vast, circular, with a deactivated nuclear reactor at its center, a monolithic cylinder of concrete and steel. The chamber was filled with hundreds of cultists, all chanting in a low, monotonous drone. The sound itself seemed to sap the warmth from the air. In the center of the room, on a raised platform before the reactor, stood the apostates, inner circle. And floating above them, held in place by shimmering chains of dark energy, was a sphere of absolute blackness the size of a car. A perfect void. It was a tear in reality, a window into the Silence Devil's domain. And it was growing with every passing moment. We're too late, Aki breathed. The ritual is at its peak. The chanting of the cultists rose in pitch, the sphere of nothingness pulsing in time with their voices. The cold, empty feeling washed over them, 10 times stronger than it had been in the forest. Naruto felt his memories start to fray at the edges again. He saw Aki stumble, Himeno clutch her head. Even Power's bravado was faltering. They were out of time. They were out of options. It was then, in that moment of despair, with his friends faltering and the void growing, that the 3 women in his life had their defining moment. Himeno, fighting through the memory-draining whispers, grabbed Naruto's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She leaned in, her face pale but her eye burning with a desperate fire, and kissed him. It was not a kiss of gratitude or affection this time. It was a kiss of pure, desperate transference. A memory, a promise. You showed me how to live, she whispered against his lips, the words a defiant shout against the silence. Whatever happens, I'm glad I met you, Naruto. Now go win. She was giving him an anchor, a memory of her own free will. A piece of her soul to hold onto. Power, seeing this, reacted with her own characteristic brand of affection. She stomped over and headbutted him squarely in the chest, a surprisingly solid blow. You are not allowed to die, she snarled, her ruby eyes blazing with a feral, possessive light. I'm the only one who gets to order you around. If you get erased, who will make me breakfast? So you'd better come back. It was her version of a love confession, a declaration of dependence that was, for her, the ultimate admission of bonding. And then, Makima's voice, quiet and clear, not over the comms, but directly in his mind. A privilege she afforded very few. I wanted to control you, she admitted, her mental voice stripped of its usual artifice, revealing a shocking, painful vulnerability. I wanted you as a weapon, a prize, the ultimate piece for my collection. Now, her voice trembled with an emotion he couldn't identify, a fear that was entirely new to her. Now, I just don't want to imagine a world without you in it. Please, Naruto-kun, don't let them erase you. He was bombarded, a kiss filled with the will to live, a headbutt demanding his survival, a confession of vulnerable, obsessive need. These 3 women, the cynical survivor, the chaotic fiend, and the manipulative controller, had all, in their own way, laid their hearts bare. They had tethered him to this world with chains forged not of duty or contract, but of genuine, messy, complicated connection. The whispers of the void crashed against this wall of pure, raw emotion. And they broke. Naruto's mind cleared, his focus becoming diamond sharp. The fraying edges of his reality solidified. He was filled with their fears, their hopes, their demands. He was not just fighting for himself, or for a forgotten past. He was fighting for their future. He looked at the growing sphere of blackness. He looked at the hundreds of chanting cultists. He knew a Rasengan wouldn't be enough. A Rasenshuriken would be too slow. He needed to wipe the board clean. He closed his eyes. Kurama, all of it. The old fox, who had been watching the emotional display with a grudging, ancient amusement, grinned in the darkness of their shared soul. About damn time, Kit. Naruto's body exploded with power. The crimson-streaked golden aura erupted into a blazing inferno. His body began to change, to grow. Bones cracked and reformed. Golden, translucent chakra flesh wrapped around him, forming a new, titanic body. A massive, nine-tailed fox, made of pure, incandescent golden energy, larger than any devil they had ever seen, materialized in the vast chamber, its head brushing the distant ceiling. The Kurama avatar. It was a being of pure, overwhelming presence, a walking, breathing sun of life and emotion in a temple dedicated to nothingness. The cultists, chanting, faltered, their eyes wide with terror. The sphere of blackness seemed to shrink in the face of this impossible, radiant being. The giant fox had turned, its colossal, slitted eyes, the size of cars, locking onto the apostate's inner circle. A voice, layered and ancient, a fusion of Naruto's will and Kurama's rage, boomed through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the bunker. "You wanted my noise," the voice roared, a sound of pure, world-defining presence. "Here it is." The Kurama avatar opened its mouth. It did not breathe fire. It did not launch a physical attack. It gathered all the chaotic, defiant, loving energy it had just been given. It gathered the memory of a kiss, the sting of a headbutt, the whisper of a confession. It gathered the desperate hope of a new world and the lingering sorrows of an old one. And it unleashed the ultimate expression of its power. A tailed beast bomb. A perfect sphere of positive and negative chakra. A condensed orb of pure, annihilating power, aimed not just at the ritual, but at the very concept of silence itself. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The roar that fills the silence. The tailed beast bomb was not a sound. It was the absence of it. For a single, eternal moment after the Kurama avatar unleashed its attack, all noise in the vast reactor chamber ceased. The panicked screams of the cultists, the hum of the failing emergency lights, the very vibration of the air, it was all consumed by the small, impossibly dense sphere of black and violet energy that shot from the avatar's maw. It did not travel like a projectile. It warped space in front of it, crossing the vast chamber in an instant. The apostates, inner circle on the central platform didn't even have time to register their own annihilation. One moment they were there, their faces masks of ecstatic horror, the next, they were simply gone, unmade by a power that was the polar opposite of their gods. The B of condensed power struck the floating sphere of pure nothingness. And reality broke. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. No fire, no shrapnel, no concussive blast. Instead, the .0 impact became a nexus of two warring absolutes. The tailed beast bomb, an ultimate expression of presence, of matter and energy, slammed into the silence devil's anchor, the ultimate expression of absence. The result was a silent, violent wave of monochrome light that expanded outwards. As it passed, color bled from the world. The golden glow of the Kurama avatar, the crimson of Power's hair, deep blue of Aki's uniform, it all desaturated into shades of gray. The very texture of reality seemed to thin, to become brittle. The cultists caught in the wave didn't die. They simply stopped. They froze in place like statues of ash, their forms flickering, threatening to dissolve into the gray nothingness that was flooding the chamber. Aki, Himeno, and Power, standing in the shadow of the colossal Kurama avatar, were shielded from the initial wave, but they felt its effects. My arm," Himeno whispered, holding up her hand. It looked translucent, like old glass. The memory of its strength, of its recent victories, was becoming fuzzy. I can't feel it. The magnificent color of my blood. Power shrieked, a genuine note of panic in her voice. She looked at a small cut on her arm, from which a slow-moving, grayish ooze was seeping. It's dull. What is this pathetic excuse for gore? Her own vibrant life force was being muted, her very concept diluted. Aki gritted his teeth, his hand on his katana. He tried to summon the fox devil. Khan, he hissed. Nothing happened. The contract was still there, but the connection was being jammed by a cosmic static. His purpose, his vendetta against the gun devil, felt distant and unimportant, a story someone else had told him a long time ago. From within the Kurama avatar, Naruto felt the metaphysical assault. The silence wasn't just erasing things. It was imposing its own fundamental rule onto their reality: nothing matters. The sphere of blackness, though battered, had not been destroyed. It had absorbed the tailed beast bomb. And now it was expanding, no longer a sphere but a creeping, amorphous tide of absolute void. It was a patch of non-existence, eating the world. And from its depths, a being began to manifest. It was not a monster of flesh and fang. It was a shape, a silhouette against the unlight of the void, a form defined only by its edges. It was humanoid, impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It had no face, no features, just a smooth, dark surface that seemed to drink the light. It was the Silence Devil itself, drawn through the weakened veil of reality by the sheer scale of the conflict. It didn't move, it simply was, and its presence was an attack. The whispers returned, no longer a chorus but a single, deafening, internal monologue broadcast into the minds of everyone left. Less than such a loud roar. A tantrum against the inevitable. All things end. All songs fade. All lights burn out. Why struggle? The end is not a punishment. It is a release. Greater than. The G.R.E.Y. tide of nothingness washed against the Kurama avatar's feet. The golden chakra hissed and sputtered, its light dimming as if being smothered. Naruto felt a profound, soul-deep lethargy. The will to fight, the burning fire of his convictions, felt like a distant ember. The faces of his friends, the memories of his past, the promises of the future, they were all becoming muted, unimportant. Less than see, it is so much easier to let go. Greater than the Silence Devil whispered, its mental voice calm, patient, and utterly persuasive. Less than join the peace. Join the nothing. Be at rest. Greater than. Naruto felt his control over the Kurama avatar slipping. The colossal form began to flicker, to lose its solidity. The temptation was immense. A peace beyond any he had ever known. An end to the struggle. Within their shared soul, Kurama roared, a sound of pure, incandescent hatred that had no physical voice. No, Kit, don't you dare. We are presence. We are rage. We are life. We do not fade. But even the Nine Tails' indomitable will was being eroded. Its very concept of self threatened by the all-consuming apathy of the void. On the ground, his friends watched in horror as their anchor, their son, began to die. Makima, watching through the eyes of a terrified, dying cultist hundreds of miles away, felt a terror she had never known. Her control, her ability to command and dominate, was useless against a force that was unmocking the very concepts of command and dominate. The world was being erased, and with it, the one being she had finally, belatedly, realized she could not bear to lose. Her network of control was failing as her puppets were unmade. For the first time, she was truly helpless. But it was Himeno who acted first. Seeing Naruto falter, she did the only thing she could think of. She scrambled to her feet, her body flickering in and out of existence, and ran towards the front line. Aki, she screamed, her voice a thin, reedy thing in the oppressive quiet. Your contract, it's not just with the Fox Devil. It's with me. You promised me a kiss, remember. It was a desperate, nonsensical gambit. But the raw, terrified emotion behind it, the memory of a stupid, flirty promise made in a bar weeks ago, was a spark of vibrant, illogical life in the spreading gray. It cut through the apathy in Aki's mind. Himeno, he whispered. The memory, so trivial and human, was a hook. He clung to it. Then power, seeing Himeno's desperate act, did the same. Nyako. My cat. He's fat and lazy and demands only the finest tuna. He needs me, she shrieked, a declaration of love and responsibility that was as pure and fierce as any epic vow. And Naruto promised me a castle of skulls. A promise to a ruler is absolute. These weren't grand philosophical arguments against nihilism. They were small, selfish, beautiful, human reasons to exist. A flirty promise, a fat cat, a ridiculous vow of a skull throne. They were sparks of defiant, nonsensical noise in the overwhelming silence. And Naruto heard them. Through the fog of encroaching nothingness, their voices reached him. They weren't just anchors anymore. They were weapons. He realized his mistake. He had tried to fight the silence devil with power, with a bigger explosion. A louder roar. But you can't blow up nothing. You can't outshout silence. You have to fill it. He dropped the Kurama avatar. The colossal form of golden energy dissolved, not into nothing, but back into him, leaving him standing alone on the cold, gray floor of the chamber. He was just a man again, small and insignificant before the towering silhouette of the primal fear. The silence devil tilted its head, a gesture of mild curiosity. Less than you surrender. Wise. Embrace the peace. Greater than. No, Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear. He closed his eyes. I'm changing the attack. He didn't gather chakra for a jutsu. He didn't tense for a physical blow. He reached inward, into the core of his being, and opened the floodgates. He unleashed his life, not as an attack, but as a broadcast. An overwhelming, omnidirectional wave of pure, unadulterated being. The memory of the sun on his face the first time he mastered Sage Mode. The taste of Ichiraku ramen. The sting of Sakura's fist. The weight of Sasuke's arm over his shoulder after their final battle. The rough, comforting rumble of Kurama's voice in his head. The pride in Iruka's eyes. The grief for Jiraiya, sharp and cold. He broadcasted it all. The triumphs. The failures. The joy. The pain. Then he added the new memories. The shock of his rebirth in a world of concrete and blood. The magnificent, infuriating arrogance of power. The smoky, sad, beautiful smile of Himeno. The cold, possessive, yet undeniably brilliant mind of Makima. The grudging respect in Aki's eyes. The taste of bacon in a chaotic apartment. The feeling of Himeno's lips on his. The weight of her head on his shoulder on a quiet rooftop. He poured out every sensation, every emotion, every bond, every moment of 2 lifetimes. It was a symphony of existence. A cacophony of life in all its messy, painful, beautiful glory. It was love and hate and rage and peace and hunger and sorrow and joy, all at once. It was the ultimate, intolerable noise. The wave of pure existence washed over the chamber. The gray tide of apathy didn't just recede, it evaporated, burned away by the sheer, vibrant color of his soul. The frozen cultists didn't just rematerialize. They screamed, their minds overloaded by the sudden, violent return of sensation, of memory, of feeling. The silence devil, a being that only understood absence, was struck by this infinite, incomprehensible torrent of presence. It was like a deaf man hearing a symphony, a blind man seeing a supernova. Its smooth, featureless face began to crack, to fissure, not from force, but from sheer sensory and conceptual overload. It couldn't process it. It couldn't comprehend it. A being of pure negation was being drowned in an ocean of affirmation. It let out a single, silent scream. A shriek of pure metaphysical agony that tore at the fabric of reality. Its silhouette wavered, destabilized. It couldn't destroy Naruto's existence, so its own was being unmade by the sheer, overwhelming fact of his. The tear in reality, the window to its realm, began to shrink, to close. The silence devil was not defeated. It was repelled. It was cast back into the hell of concepts, its Ancho. To this world shattered by a song it could not understand. With a final, silent implosion, the void vanished. And color, sound, and feeling rushed back into the world. The reactor chamber was filled with the groans of the waking cultists. The hum of the lights, the drip of water. Naruto stood in the center of it all, swaying on his feet, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He had poured out nearly everything he was. He was drained, not of chakra, but of spirit. He was an empty cup. He collapsed, but he didn't hit the floor. A strong arm wrapped around his waist, Aki's grip firm. A softer form supported his other side. Himeno leaning into him, her warmth a comfort. And in front of him, Power stood guard, her fists clenched, glaring at the dazed cultists as if daring them to even breathe in Naruto's direction. You did it. Golden boy, Himeno whispered, her voice thick with awe. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it. His victory was never in doubt. Power declared, though her voice trembled slightly. I commanded him to win, and he obeyed. As is proper. Aki just looked at him, at the man who had faced down godlike oblivion with the sheer force of his own heart, and for the first time, he smiled. A small, tired, but genuine smile. Welcome back, he said. The aftermath was chaos, but it was a manageable, human chaos. Public safety forces, led by a grim-faced Makima W.H.O. had arrived with the first wave of reinforcements, swarmed the facility, arresting the disillusioned apostates. The world was safe, for now. The threat was gone, pushed back into the dark. Days later, Naruto stood on the roof of the public safety building, looking out at the Tokyo skyline. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink. He was still tired, the deep, soul weariness slow to fade, but he felt whole. Footsteps approached from behind. 3 sets. He didn't need to turn. He knew their presence as well as his own. Himeno came to stand on his left, bumping her shoulder against his. She was silent, but her presence was a comforting warmth. She had quit smoking entirely. Power bounced to his right, holding up a stolen sausage bun. Tribute for the victorious subordinate, she announced, shoving it into his hand. And Makima came to a stop just behind him. He could feel her gaze on his back, the obsessive intensity now tempered with something else. Respect, and a fear of loss that had shaken her to her core. The world owes you a debt it can never repay, she said, her voice quiet. I didn't do it for the world, Naruto said, his eyes on the setting sun. I did it for my friends. He felt a hand slide into his. He looked down. It was Makima's, her fingers intertwined with his. The touch was different now. It wasn't a gesture of ownership or control. It wasn't a leash. It was an anchor. A desperate, possessive, but genuine attempt to hold on to the one thing in the universe she had discovered she could not, and no longer wanted to, control. Himeno, seeing this, simply smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture of quiet, easy intimacy. Power, not to be outdone, wrapped her arms around his other arm, clinging to him like a limpet. My subordinate is tired. He requires my magnificent presence to recuperate. Naruto stood there, on a rooftop in a world that was not his own, but was now his home. He was flanked by the cynical survivor who had learned to hope. The fiend of blood and chaos who had learned to love, and the Machiavellian ruler who had been forced to feel. His life was complicated. It was messy. It was a chaotic symphony of conflicting desires and dangerous loyalties. He looked out at the setting sun, a sausage bun in one hand, Makima's hand in the other, Himeno on his shoulder, and Power clinging to his arm. A small, tired, but deeply contented smile spread across his face. He was home. Chapter 7 End.